Welcome to the Learn English Lab, the show where we like to really dig into a topic you want to learn more about. I'm Mike.
And I'm Sarah.
And we're your hosts for this deep dive.
That's right. Today we're tackling something that can be exciting, but also maybe a little nerve-wracking.
Oh yeah, especially when it comes up in professional settings,
Exactly. We're talking about how to describe your strengths.
In English, which I know is something a lot of English learners want to get better at.
For sure.
I think we've all been there, right? Like someone asks you, what are you good at? And suddenly,
total brain freeze.
it's like all the words just vanish.
Woof.
It can almost feel like you're bragging if you have to say what you're good at.
I know what you mean.
It feels awkward.
It's totally understandable to feel that way, but it's so important to remember that this isn't about, boasting or anything, recognizing your strength and being able to actually say them out loud.
Put them into words.
Yes, that's a super valuable skill. And it goes way beyond just job interviews, which is what a lot of people think of.
Oh, for sure. It's bigger than that.
It is. It's about understanding your own value, setting goals, even just building your everyday confidence, in all kinds of situations.
It's like owning what you bring to the table, right?
Absolutely.
But one thing I was thinking about as we were prepping for this was I came across this example where someone just put communication skills as their strength.
Okay.
And it just seemed so...
generic.
Yes. Thank you. Doesn't that describe almost everyone to some degree?
It does. Communication skills is the most basic label. It's a starting point, but it doesn't really tell us anything about you.
Right. What makes your communication skills stand out?
Exactly. So this is where we have to go deeper.
Ooh, I like that.
We got to go past those general terms and give some real evidence.
Like proof. So don't tell. Right.
Exactly. Proof of what makes that strength special to you.
Okay, so how do we do that? Because just saying I'm a good communicator, it doesn't really convince anyone,
It doesn't. You need something more.
Something more concrete.
Definitely.
One thing I read about was this thing called the STAR method.
Oh, the STAR method, yes.
Is that something you've used before?
I have, and I've seen it work really well. It's a great way to describe your strengths and make them,
Memorable?
Memorable, and also, people really get it.
Oh, interesting.
It stands for situation, task, action, result.
Okay, break that down for me.
So basically, instead of just saying, I'm good at this, you tell a little story.
I like stories.
Me too. So you describe a specific situation where you use that strength.
Like a real example.
Yes. Then what was the task you had to do in that situation? What action did you take? And finally, what was the result?
So it's almost like instead of saying I'm good at problem solving, you're actually telling a story about a problem you solved.
Exactly. And that makes it much more engaging for the listener.
I could see that. It's way more convincing.
It is. It brings that skill to life.
And do you think it's also helpful for the person telling the story? To actually remember those times they used their strengths?
Definitely. It can be a good reminder of what you're capable of.
I love that. Okay, so tell me, could you give us a concrete example of the STAR method in action?
Sure. Let's say you're in a job interview and the interviewer asks about your, problem-solving skills.
Classic interview question.
Right. So instead of just saying, oh, I'm a great problem solver, you could say something like, in my previous role, we had a big project due, a really tight deadline.
Sounds stressful.
It was. And our main supplier, they totally bailed on us last minute.
No. What did you do?
So it was my job to find a new supplier, ASAP.
High pressure?
Big time. So I quickly researched local vendors, negotiated a new contract, and we actually managed to meet the deadline without having to compromise on quality.
Wow. That's a good story.
It is, and it shows your problem-solving skills in action.
It does. Way better than just saying, I'm good at problem solving.
Right.
So stories are key.
They are. Now, another important thing to remember is, whenever you can, try to quantify your impact.
Quantify. What do you mean?
Use numbers, data, hard facts.
Oh, I get it. Evidence.
Exactly. It makes your statements way more concrete and impactful. So instead of saying, I improved team efficiency, you could say, I implemented a new system that led to a 20% increase in team efficiency.
Oh, I see. The numbers make it real.
They do. It's all about going beyond just listing qualities and showing how those strengths actually make a difference, measurable results.
So it's not just telling, it's also showing.
Exactly. Showing what you can do.
I like that. Okay, so we're painting a clear picture here.
Yes.
But I imagine that how you describe your strengths, it probably changes depending on the situation, right?
Oh, absolutely. Different contexts call for showcasing different sides of your strengths.
So what you'd emphasize in a job interview might be different from what you talk about when you're, say, networking.
Exactly.
Could you give us some examples?
Sure. So for a job interview, you really want to look at that job description.
Right. Tailor it to the specific job.
Yes. The goal is to demonstrate how your skills and experiences directly connect to what they're looking for.
So you're showing them you've got what it takes.
You got it. Now, when you're networking, it's a little different.
Okay, how so?
Networking is more about standing out, being memorable. What makes you unique? What strengths would leave a lasting impression?
So it's less about fitting a specific mold and more about showing your personality.
Yes, it's about making connections and showing people what you're all about.
That makes sense. Like if someone's applying to be a teacher, they might want to highlight their adaptability, right?
Perfect example, because teachers, they're constantly dealing with new situations, different students. You have to be able to adapt.
It's true. Okay, so we've talked a lot about showcasing strengths.
I have.
But I think it's time we talk about the, well, maybe not so strong areas.
The things we could be better at.
Yes. How do we talk about those weaknesses without, making ourselves look bad?
The dreaded weaknesses question. I know that one can be tough.
It is. I think everyone gets a little nervous when they hear it.
It's understandable, but it doesn't have to be scary. The key is to reframe it. Think of it as a chance to show that you're self-aware and that you want to grow.
So it's not about just listing all your flaws.
No, it's about showing that you know where you can improve and that you're actually taking steps to work on those areas.
I like that. It's a positive spin.
Exactly. It's about being honest, but also strategic.
Strategic. Okay, tell me more.
So when you're picking a weakness to talk about, choose something that's not like the core skill needed for the job,
Okay,
but something that you are actively trying to improve.
I get it. So like if someone tends to procrastinate.
That's a good example. Or maybe they get nervous about public speaking. Those are common ones.
They are. So how do you actually talk about a weakness like that?
The most important part is to pair that weakness with a plan. Show the interviewer that you're not just aware of it, but you're actually doing something about it.
Concrete steps.
Yes. So for procrastination, you could say something like, I sometimes struggle with procrastination, but I've been working on my time management skills. I've started setting clear deadlines for myself, breaking down big tasks into smaller ones, and I use to-do lists and scheduling apps to stay organized.
Wow, that sounds a lot better than just saying, yeah, I put things off till the last minute.
Right, it shows initiative and that you're not trying to hide your flaws, but you're actually working to improve.
And the employers like that, right?
They do. It shows a growth mindset.
Growth mindset, what does that mean exactly?
A growth mindset is, well, it's the belief that your abilities, your intelligence, they can get better through hard work and dedication.
So it's not about being fixed in one place. It's about constantly learning and evolving.
Yes, it's about seeing challenges as opportunities and setbacks as, well, just stepping stones on the path to improvement.
That's a great way to look at it.
It is. It's a much more positive and empowering approach.
This actually reminds me of something I'm trying to work on personally.
Oh,
I can be pretty self-critical, especially when it comes to my work.
I hear that.
Like I'm always striving for perfection, which sometimes means I spend way too long on a task or get discouraged if it's not, exactly how I pictured it.
That's something a lot of us struggle with. But it's great that you're aware of it. What are you doing to manage that tendency?
Well, I've been trying to focus on celebrating the small wins,
Oh, I love that.
acknowledging my accomplishments, even if they're not perfect, and setting more realistic deadlines for myself, being a little kinder to myself, basically.
That's fantastic, Mike. It's so important to be kind to ourselves, especially when we're striving to improve.
It's true. And it's hard sometimes.
It can be. But remember, none of us are perfect, and aiming to get better is great, but we also have to acknowledge how far we've come.
It's about the journey, not just the destination, right?
You got it. It's a process of continuous growth.
I like that. Continuous growth. That's something we can all work towards.
Absolutely. And it's a journey we can all take together.
I love that. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, Sarah. I'm actually feeling a lot more confident about this whole topic now.
That's wonderful to hear, Mike. Remember, it's not about memorizing perfect answers. It's about being prepared, being yourself, and presenting the best version of you.
One of the things that really stuck with me was this emphasis on practice.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not enough to just know your strengths and weaknesses. We have to actually get comfortable talking about them.
You have to practice. Like any skill, the more you do it, the better you get.
So what are some ways people can practice this? Should we all be standing in front of the mirror, having conversations with ourselves?
That's one way. But there are others. You can write out your answers, practice with a friend or family member, even record yourself talking, and then listen back. The key is to find something that works for you, something that helps you feel more confident.
I like the idea of practicing with a friend. That would be helpful, especially to get used to answering questions in a more natural way.
It's a great way to get feedback, too. You can ask your friend how you come across and if they have any suggestions.
Okay, so we're practicing, we're getting feedback. What else should we keep in mind when describing our strengths and weaknesses?
Above all, be authentic. Choose strengths and weaknesses that you genuinely identify with. Don't try to force yourself into a mold that doesn't feel natural.
Because if you're not being true to yourself, it'll probably show, right?
Exactly. Another essential tip is to be specific. Avoid vague statements. Instead, use concrete examples and anecdotes to illustrate your points. Those details make your answers more memorable and engaging.
Like the STAR method.
Yes. And when you're talking about your weaknesses, always focus on the positive steps you're taking to address them. Show your growth and commitment to improvement.
So it's not about pretending to be perfect. It's about acknowledging that we all have areas where we can grow and showing that we're working towards becoming the best versions of ourselves.
Beautifully said, Mike. It's about embracing that journey of learning and self-improvement.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. I feel like we've all learned so much about how to describe our strengths and weaknesses, not just for professional gain, but for building stronger, more meaningful connections in all areas of our lives.
I agree, Mike.
And for everyone listening, if you enjoyed this deep dive into how to describe your strengths in English, be sure to give this video a like, share it with someone who might find it helpful, and subscribe to the Learn English Labs for more insightful language explorations. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep rocking your strengths.
It really is. And speaking of journeys,
Yeah.
this whole conversation has me thinking, we've been focusing on how to talk about strengths and weaknesses in those job interview situations.
Right, professional settings?
Exactly. But isn't this relevant to all parts of life, our personal lives too?
Ooh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that.
I mean, those relationships we have with friends, family, partners, understanding our strengths and weaknesses, it has to play a role there, right?
That's a really good point. I think we often compartmentalize these skills, like they only matter for work.
It's easy to do that.
But those strong relationships, they're built on a lot of the same stuff, right? Like understanding each other, clear communication, and that willingness to learn and grow, both as individuals and together.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. It's not just about professional success. It's about personal growth too.
So how do we apply these concepts, these strengths and weaknesses, even the STAR method, to our personal relationships?
Well, for one thing, knowing your strengths can help you contribute more effectively.
Okay, I like that.
Let's say empathy is one of your big strengths. Being aware of that can make you a more attentive listener. You can offer genuine support when someone needs it, and it helps you build those stronger connections with the people you care about.
So it's like using your strengths to be a better friend, partner, family member.
Exactly. Now, the weaknesses part, that can feel trickier.
Oh yeah, way more vulnerable to talk about those in personal relationships, I think.
It can be, for sure. But it can also be so powerful.
How so?
Think of it this way. When you share your weaknesses with someone, you're showing them a huge amount of trust.
That's true. You're letting them see a side of you that maybe you don't show everyone.
Exactly. A deeper, more authentic side of yourself. It's like saying, hey, I'm not perfect, but I'm working on it, and I trust you enough to see this part of me.
I like that.
And when both people in a relationship are willing to do that, to be vulnerable and share those areas where they want to grow, it builds such a strong foundation, a foundation of understanding, support, and the potential to improve together.
Wow. So instead of seeing weaknesses as something to hide, we can actually use them to strengthen our relationships.
You got it. When we address them honestly with that desire to grow, they can actually bring us closer together.
That's a really cool perspective. I like that a lot. So we're not just talking about acing a job interview here.
Nope.
We're talking about building better, more honest, more fulfilling relationships with the people we care about.
Absolutely. And remember that STAR method we talked about earlier? That can apply to personal situations too.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Let's say, you have a tendency to get defensive during arguments.
Ooh, yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that.
It's a common one. And maybe it's something you're working on. So you could use the STAR method to talk to your partner about a specific time when you got defensive. Describe the situation, how you reacted, and the negative impact it had.
Okay.
And then you can share the steps you're taking to communicate more effectively, to manage your emotions better.
So you're turning a potential conflict into an opportunity for growth and better communication.
Exactly. It's not about placing blame. It's about understanding and working together.
This has been so insightful, Sarah. Honestly, I'm feeling a lot more confident about this whole topic now. Not just for job interviews, but for life in general.
That's fantastic, Mike. Remember, it's not about having the perfect answers. It's about being prepared, being genuine, and showing up as your best self.
One of the things that really stuck with me was this idea of practice.
Oh yeah, practice is key.
It's not enough to just know your strengths and weaknesses. We have to get comfortable talking about them.
Absolutely. It's a skill, just like anything else. The more you do it, the easier it gets.
So what are some ways people can practice this? Should we all be standing in front of the mirror, having conversations with ourselves?
If that works for you, go for it. But there are other ways too. You can write out your answers, role play with a friend, even record yourself and listen back. The important thing is to find a method that helps you build confidence and get comfortable talking about yourself.
I really like the idea of role-playing with a friend. That seems like it would be really helpful, especially to get used to answering questions in a more natural way.
It is. And you get feedback too. Ask your friend how you sound if they have any tips.
Okay, so we're practicing, we're getting feedback. What else should we keep in mind when we're describing our strengths and weaknesses?
The most important thing is to be authentic. Choose strengths and weaknesses that you truly identify with. Don't try to fit yourself into some kind of mold that doesn't feel right.
Because if you're not being true to yourself, it'll probably show, right?
Exactly. And another key thing is to be specific. Avoid those vague general statements. Use concrete examples, tell stories, give details. That's what makes your answers memorable and engaging.
Like with the STAR method.
Yes. And when you talk about your weaknesses, remember to always focus on the positive steps you're taking to address them. Show that you're committed to growth and improvement.
So it's not about pretending to be perfect. It's about acknowledging that we all have areas where we can grow and showing that we're actively trying to be better.
Beautifully put, Mike. It's about embracing that journey of learning and self-improvement.
Well, this deep dive has been amazing. Seriously, I think we've all learned so much about how to describe our strengths and weaknesses, not just for our careers, but for building stronger, more meaningful relationships in all areas of our lives.
I agree, Mike. It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you.
And for everyone watching, if you enjoyed this deep dive into how to describe your strengths in English, be sure to give this video a like, share it with someone who might find it helpful, and subscribe to the Learn English Lab for more insightful language explorations. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep rocking your strengths. We've talked a lot about describing strengths and weaknesses for jobs, like interviews and networking. But it got me thinking, what about in our, personal lives, just everyday life? How can understanding these things, like our strengths and weaknesses, how can that help us in our relationships?
That's a great question. It's something we often forget about. We get so focused on using these skills in professional settings.
Right.
But they're so valuable in our personal lives, too.
Okay, yeah, because good relationships, they're built on understanding each other.
Yeah.
Communication. Being willing to grow together.
Right, exactly. So how do we actually take these ideas, the strengths, the weaknesses, the STAR method even, how do we use them in our relationships with friends, family, partners? It feels different, right, than a job interview.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It is different, but the underlying idea, the principle, it's the same. Like knowing your strengths, that can help you be a better friend, partner, whatever.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you're a really organized person.
Okay.
That's a strength, right? So you could be the one who plans events or manages shared responsibilities.
That makes things easier for everyone.
Exactly. It makes life smoother.
Okay, so that's strengths.
Yeah.
But weaknesses, those are trickier, I think.
Oh, definitely. Especially in personal relationships.
It can feel way more vulnerable to talk about them.
Yeah. But it can also be, honestly, it can be really powerful.
How so?
When you're willing to share a weakness with someone, you're saying, hey, I trust you.
Oh, that's interesting.
You're letting them see a part of you that maybe you don't show everyone,
A more private side.
Yeah, a deeper side of yourself.
Makes sense.
And when both people are willing to do that, to be open about those things they want to work on, it creates such a strong foundation for the relationship.
Wow. So instead of thinking of weakness as something to hide, you can actually use them to build stronger relationships.
Absolutely. It brings you closer together.
Okay, so we're not just talking about acing a job interview.
No.
We're talking about building better relationships with everyone in our lives.
Exactly. And even the STAR method, remember that, that can be helpful in personal situations too.
Oh, really? I'm curious how.
Let's say you have a tendency to interrupt people.
Ooh, yeah, I know a few people like that.
It happens, so maybe that's something you're working on. You could use the STAR method to talk to a friend about it.
Like a specific time it interrupted them.
Yeah. Explain what happened, how you reacted, why it wasn't good, and then talk about what you're doing to be a better listener.
So you're turning something that could be an argument into a positive.
Exactly. It's not about blaming each other. It's about understanding.
I like that. This has been so insightful, honestly.
I'm glad.
I feel a lot more confident about all this now.
Awesome. Remember, it's not about having the perfect answer. It's about being prepared and being yourself.
Being genuine, right.
Exactly.
One thing that I'll definitely take away from this is the importance of practice.
So important.
It's one thing to know your strengths and weaknesses, but you have to be able to talk about them comfortably.
Yes. It takes practice, just like anything else.
So how can people practice this? Should we be talking to the mirror?
If that works for you, go for it. But you could also write down your answers or practice with a friend.
Oh, like role-playing?
Yeah. You can even record yourself and listen back.
Oh, that's a good idea.
The key is to find what helps you feel confident.
Okay, so practice is key. What else should we keep in mind when we're talking about our strengths and weaknesses?
The most important thing. Be authentic. Choose things that you genuinely connect with. Don't try to be someone you're not.
Because that never works.
It really doesn't. And another tip, be specific. Don't be vague.
Give details.
Yes, tell stories, give examples. That's what makes it interesting.
Like with the STAR method.
Exactly. And when you're talking about weaknesses, always focus on what you're doing to improve.
Show that you want to grow, right?
You got it.
So it's not about being perfect, it's about being honest and always trying to be better.
Perfectly said.
Well, this deep dive has been fantastic, I have to say. I think we've all learned so much about how to talk about our strengths and weaknesses, not just for work, but for life.
I agree, Mike. It's been a pleasure chatting with you about all this.
And to everyone watching, if you enjoyed this deep dive into describing your strengths in English, hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the Learn English Lab for more. We'll see you next time. Hello, and welcome to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and I'm really excited about today's topic because I think it's something we all struggle with from time to time and could always use a little bit of help with, and that is communication skills.
Yeah, it really is the foundation of everything we do. It's so important in our relationships at work and every aspect of our lives. And I'm Sarah. I'm happy to be here to talk about this with you.
You know, you're right. Communication is essential. It's kind of like a superpower when you think about it. Today we're not trying to turn anyone into some kind of like communication guru overnight. But we do want to give some real practical advice on how we can all improve our communication skills, whether it's for everyday conversations, emails, presentations, anything really.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about real-world strategies you can use right away. And, one of the things that came up again and again in the research we did was this idea of active listening.
Oh yeah, active listening. I've definitely been guilty of kind of zoning out during conversations or thinking about what I want to say next instead of really listening to the other person. But it sounds like active listening is so much more than just hearing the words someone is saying.
It really is. It's about being present, being engaged, and making the other person feel like they're being heard and understood. When you feel like someone is truly listening to you, it creates a sense of trust and connection.
Yeah, it's like when you're talking to a close friend and you can tell they're right there with you 100%. No distractions, no judgment, just fully focused on what you're saying.
Exactly, and that can have a huge impact on the entire conversation. When you're actively listening, you're more likely to understand the other person's perspective, ask good questions, and come up with solutions together.
So it's not just about being polite, it's actually a really important skill for collaborating and problem solving.
Absolutely, and it's even more crucial these days with so much communication happening online. When you're not face-to-face, it can be harder to pick up on those subtle nonverbal cues, so you really have to make an extra effort to listen actively and make sure you're understanding each other.
That makes a lot of sense. So active listening, that's like level 1 of communication mastery. What else can we do to improve our skills?
Well, this is where things get really interesting because a lot of times we focus so much on the words we're saying, but what about all the other messages we're sending without even realizing it?
You're talking about body language, right? I've definitely had those moments where I've completely misread someone's body language and it's made things super awkward.
Oh, it happens to the best of us, but the reality is that our nonverbal communication can say just as much as our words. Think about it. You can tell if someone is bored or interested or even upset just by looking at their posture, their eye contact, their facial expressions.
Yeah, it's like when someone says, "I'm fine," but their tone of voice and their crossed arms are telling a completely different story.
Exactly. Our body language can either support our words or contradict them completely. And the interesting thing is that we can actually use this to our advantage.
So are you saying there are like secret body language tricks we can use to get people to do what we want, like some kind of Jedi mind control?
Ha ha, not quite. But we can definitely be more aware of the nonverbal signals we're sending. For example, making eye contact is a great way to show you're engaged. And subtly mirroring someone's posture can help build rapport.
Mirroring, so like if someone leans forward, I should lean forward too. Like we're doing some kind of synchronized dance.
Well, think of it more as a subtle reflection, not an exact imitation. The key is to do it naturally and authentically.
Got it. No robot moves allowed. But I do like the idea of being more aware of my own body language, Am I slouching? Am I fidgeting? Are my arms crossed like I'm putting up a wall?
It's all about awareness. If you start paying attention to those nonverbal cues in yourself and in others, you'll be surprised by how much you learned.
This is blowing my mind. I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of communication mastery here.
Oh, we've only just begun. Let's shift gear for a minute and talk about another really important piece of communication writing skills. We do so much writing these days: emails, texts, social media posts, reports. It's endless.
It could be overwhelming, but all the experts we looked at agree that good writing is basically good thinking. It makes you organize your ideas clearly so that other people can understand them.
It's all about clarity and precision, whether you're writing a persuasive email or trying to tell a captivating story.
And don't even get me started on the importance of proofreading. I can't tell you how many emails I've sent with embarrassing typos that made me want to hide under my desk.
Oh, we've all been there. But thankfully, we have some amazing tools now to help us catch those mistakes. Grammar checking software can be a lifesaver.
Oh, I love those tools. They're so helpful. But it's not just about being grammatically correct. It's about making sure your message is clear, concise, and gets to the point. Nobody wants to read a giant wall of text.
You're so right. It's like decluttering your writing. Get rid of all the unnecessary words and phrases and let your ideas shine through.
I love that analogy. So clear writing equals clear thinking. But how can we make our writing even more engaging and memorable? That's where storytelling comes in, right?
Absolutely. Stories are powerful. We're hardwired to connect with them. They capture our attention, trigger our emotions, and help us remember information. Think about your favorite TED Talks or presentations. They often use storytelling to make their messages stick.
Oh, totally. I've seen TED Talks that have completely changed my perspective on things. And it's all because the speaker told a compelling story that drew me in.
Stories help us relate to information and make it feel more real. And you don't have to be a professional storyteller to use this technique. We can all find stories from our own lives that can make our messages more persuasive and help us connect with our audience on a human level.
So instead of just listing facts and figures, I could share a personal anecdote or an example to bring my message to life.
Exactly. It's a much more engaging way to communicate. And it brings us to another important idea: authenticity.
Authenticity. It seems like that's a theme that keeps coming up in everything we've talked about so far, from active listening to body language to storytelling.
It's true, because at the end of the day, communication is about connecting with other human beings. And that connection is built on trust and being genuine. When you're authentic, you're showing up as your true self without any masks or filters.
But that to be scary. What if people don't like the real me?
That's a valid fear, but I think it's important to remember that people are drawn to authenticity. When you're genuine, you're more relatable, more likable, and ultimately more effective as a communicator.
So it's not about trying to be someone I'm not. It's about embracing my unique communication style and letting my personality shine through.
Exactly, and it's about understanding your own feelings and being sensitive to the emotions of others. That's what we call emotional intelligence, and it plays a huge role in how we connect with other people.
This is so insightful. I'm starting to see how all these different communication skills are connected. It's not just about mastering individual techniques. It's about cultivating a mindset of authenticity, empathy, and genuine connection.
That's a great way to put it.
This has been amazing. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, though.
We have a lot more to talk about.
Wow. We were just talking about body language before the break, and it's crazy how much we communicate without even saying a word.
I know, it's like this whole other language we're all speaking.
Right. And speaking of communication, one thing that really stood out to me in all the research we did was this emphasis on clarity and being concise, especially when it comes to writing.
Oh, absolutely. We've all read those emails or articles that just go on and on and on, and by the end you're like, wait, what was the point they were trying to make?
Exactly. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. So how can we avoid doing that to other people? How can we make our writing clearer?
Well, I think it comes down to structure and simplicity. Think of your writing like a roadmap. You want to make it easy for your reader to follow along and get to their destination without getting lost.
You're right. It's like you're building a bridge for your ideas to cross over.
And don't forget about white space, too. Giving your words room to breathe on the page makes a huge difference in how readable something is.
Okay, good point. Now, I personally love using strong verbs and descriptive language to make my writing more interesting, but I also know it's easy to go overboard and end up sounding pretentious or just confusing. How do you find that balance?
That's a great question, and I think the answer depends on who you're writing for. If you're writing for a specific audience in your field, then using some technical terms might be fine. But if you're writing for a general audience, it's best to stick with clear and simple language that everyone can understand.
Makes sense. Don't use your fancy words unless they really add something to your message.
Right. And don't forget about the power of storytelling. We were talking about that earlier. Storytelling can be just as effective in writing as it is in speaking.
Oh, definitely. A good story can make even the most complicated topic more engaging and memorable.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about listening, we've talked about writing. Now let's move on to what is probably the most feared form of communication: public speaking.
Yeah, public speaking, I think almost everyone gets a little nervous when they have to speak in front of a group.
It's one of the most common fears out there, but it doesn't have to be terrifying. With practice and the right mindset, anyone can become a confident and engaging public speaker.
Okay, so how do we get started? What are some tips for calming those nerves? and giving a great presentation?
Well, the first thing is to know your material really well. The more familiar you are with your topic, the more confident you'll feel.
That makes sense. You have to have a solid foundation to stand on.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to practice, practice, practice. You can rehearse in front of a mirror or with friends or family, or even record yourself to see how you come across.
Practice makes perfect, right? Or at least it makes us feel less terrified.
And it's important to remember that it's okay to be nervous. Those nerves can actually give you a little extra energy and help you stay focused.
So it's all about channeling that nervous energy into positive energy.
Right, and don't forget about connecting with your audience. Make eye contact, smile, use your voice to engage them, and make them feel like you're talking to them, not at them.
That's good advice. Okay, now for the part I always dread questions from the audience. I always freeze up when someone asks me a question I don't know the answer to.
A lot of people feel that way, but remember, questions are a good thing. They mean your audience is interested and wants to learn more.
So instead of dreading questions, I should welcome them.
And if you don't know the answer to a question, it's perfectly fine to say, "That's a great question. I don't have the answer right now, but I'll be happy to look into it and get back to you."
Phew, that takes the pressure off.
The more you practice public speaking, the more comfortable you'll become. It's like anything else. The more you do it, the easier it gets.
And who knows, maybe you'll even start to enjoy it. Okay, so we've talked about listening, writing, speaking. What other communication skills do we need in our arsenal?
Well, in today's world, we can't forget about online communication. That's a whole other set of challenges.
Oh yeah, for sure. Email, social media, instant messaging. It seems like we're always communicating online these days. And it can be tricky sometimes. It's so easy to misinterpret someone's tone or intention in a text or an email.
You're right, and without those nonverbal cues we can rely on when we're face-to-face, it's easy for misunderstandings to happen.
So how can we make sure our digital communication is clear, effective, and professional?
I think the most important thing is to be mindful of your tone. It's really easy to come across as abrupt or rude in writing, even when you don't mean to be.
Especially when you're typing quickly and not really thinking about how your words might sound to the other person.
So it's always a good idea to reread your emails or messages before you hit send. Just make sure they convey the tone you intended.
And sometimes adding an emoji can help soften the tone of a message too, like a smiley face.
Emojis can be helpful, but use them carefully and always be aware of who you're communicating with. What's appropriate for a text message to a friend might not be appropriate for a formal email to a client.
Good point. It's all about context, speaking of which. What about social media? It's such a powerful tool for connecting with people, but it can also be a minefield if you're not careful.
It's true. Anything you post online is out there for the world to see. Potential employers, clients, even future romantic partners.
So think before you told.
And be mindful of your privacy settings. Social media can be a great way to connect with people, but it's important to protect your personal information.
One thing I've noticed about online communication is that it can feel very impersonal. It's easy to forget that there's a real person on the other side of the screen.
That's a really important point. We need to make an effort to bring that human element into our online interactions. Use people's names, show genuine interest in what they have to say, and don't be afraid to pick up the phone or have a video call if you need to have a more personal conversation.
Sometimes a real conversation is just better. Okay, so we've covered listening, writing, speaking, and online communication. What else?
Well, there's one more essential aspect of communication that I want to touch on before we wrap up, and that's feedback, both giving and receiving feedback.
Feedback is so important for growth, but it can be hard to give and receive sometimes, especially when it's negative.
It's definitely a delicate balance. We want to be honest and helpful, but we also don't want to hurt anyone's feelings or damage relationships.
So how do we give feedback that's constructive and not hurtful?
I think the key is to approach it with empathy and a genuine desire to help the other person improve. Instead of focusing on what they did wrong, try to frame your feedback in terms of how they can do better next time.
So instead of saying that presentation was boring, I could say something like, I think your presentation would be more engaging if you included more visuals or stories.
Exactly. That's much more helpful. And when you're on the receiving end of feedback, it's important to listen, actively ask clarifying questions if you need to, and try not to get defensive.
I need to work on that last part. I definitely have a tendency to take negative feedback, personally, even when I know the person giving it is just trying to help.
It's a natural reaction, but try to remember that feedback is a gift. Even when it's not packaged in the nicest way, it's an opportunity to learn and grow.
So let's all make a pact to embrace feedback, both giving and receiving, and use it to help each other become better communicators.
I love that.
Well, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into communication skills. It's been a really interesting conversation so far.
It has. We've covered so much ground, from the basics of active listening to the complexities of digital communication.
As we wrap things up, I'm curious, what are some of the key takeaways that our listeners can walk away with? What are the big ideas that can really make a difference in how we communicate?
If I had to sum it all up in one sentence, I'd say communication is about building bridges. It's about connecting with people, understanding their perspective, and creating strong relationships.
I love that. And it really ties everything together, doesn't it? Active listening, clear writing body language. It's all about making those connections.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that communication is a two-way street. It's not just about getting our own point across. It's also about listening to and understanding the other person.
It's like a dance, where both partners have to be in sync and responsive to each other.
That's a great analogy. And like any dance, it takes practice, patience, and a willingness to adapt.
One thing that really stood out to me during this conversation is that there's no one right way to communicate. We all have our own unique styles and strengths.
That's so true, and it's important to embrace that. What works for one person might not work for another. The key is to be self-aware and to understand your own communication style.
So like if I'm more of an introvert and I prefer to communicate inviting, that's okay. I don't have to force myself to be a big extroverted public speaker.
Exactly. You can still be a very effective communicator, even if you're not the most outgoing person in the room. In fact, sometimes the people who listen the most are the best communicators.
That's encouraging to hear. So there's power in every communication style.
And remember, communication is a skill that you can develop and improve over time. It's a lifelong journey.
And it's okay to make mistakes along the way, right?
Absolutely. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them and keep trying to get better.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what's one final piece of advice you would give to our listeners who want to improve their communication skills?
Be present, be mindful, and be authentic. Those three things will take you a long way.
That's great advice. I think we can all benefit from that. So to all of our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the world of communication skills. We hope you found it helpful. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Learn English Lab for more deep dives into topics that matter. Until next time, keep practicing those communication skills and go out there and connect with the world. Hello and welcome to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and boy, am I excited for this deep dive. We're going to be tackling a question that I know a lot of you have probably wondered about: how to sound like a native English speaker. And to help us unlock this mystery, we've got the amazing Sarah here, our language expert extraordinaire.
Thanks for having me.
So Sarah, what pops into your head when you hear that question? How to sound like a native speaker?
Well, it's a fantastic question, and it really makes you think about what it actually means to really master a language. And honestly, one of the best strategies might surprise you. It all begins with mimicry.
Mimicry. You mean like pretending to be somebody else?
Yeah, exactly. Think of it kind of like an actor getting ready for a role. They watch, they listen, they imitate. And when it comes to learning languages, that kind of total imitation can be super powerful, Instead of just learning the rules, you're actually training your mouth to move in totally new ways to make sounds that you might not be used to.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. How does that actually work when you're learning?
So one of the most important things is focusing on the physical part of speaking. Pay attention to how native speakers move their mouths, their lips, even their tongues when they're making different sounds. You can even use visuals to help you outwatch videos or look in the mirror as you practice. The goal is to build up that muscle memory so those sounds start to feel natural and you don't even have to think about them.
So it's almost like we're rewiring our brains to think in a different language, both mentally and physically.
You got it. You're not just memorizing words and grammar, you're actually developing a whole new way of talking, a new way to express yourself. It's like embodying the language, not just getting it.
That's so cool. But let's be real. Not everybody has the time or the money to just pick up and move to an English-speaking country to fully immerse themselves. Are there any tools or techniques that can help us speed this process up?
Oh, you're totally right. Full immersion is not always possible. But luckily, we're living in a time where technology can give us incredible support. There are some awesome pronunciation apps that can give you personalized coaching, interactive exercises, and even feedback in real time. It's like having a personal language tutor right in your pocket.
So we've got mimicry and technology working together. What else can we do to really get rid of that gap between textbook English and that smooth, natural speech we all want?
I think one of the biggest changes happens when you start thinking in English.
Whoa. Hold on right there. This is something I hear a lot, but I feel like people don't really explain it. How do you actually do that? It sounds awesome, but it can be really hard to actually make it happen.
You're right. It's not a piece of cake, but it's super important if you want to stop sounding like you're reading from a textbook. One easy thing you can try is to start narrating your day in English. Describe what you're doing, what you see, what you're feeling all in your head using English.
So instead of thinking I'm making coffee, I'd think I'm brewing a cup of joe.
Bingo! It might feel a little weird at first, but it really helps you break out of that habit of translating everything back and forth in your mind. And the more you do it, the more natural it'll become. You'll just start thinking in English without even realizing it.
That's actually super useful. I love that.
Here's another one that might sound a little strange. Embrace being imperfect.
What do you mean by that?
Don't be scared to make mistakes. Actually, mistakes are your buddies. They're chances to learn and get better. Record yourself speaking English, listen back, and see where you can do better. You'll be shocked by how much you learn just from hearing yourself.
I've never liked hearing recordings of myself, but you're right, it could be a really helpful tool. It's like getting someone else's opinion on how you speak.
Exactly. It helps you catch those little things that you might not even know you're doing. And the coolest part is you can see how much you improve over time. You can literally hear yourself getting better.
All right, so we're mimicking, we're using technology, we're thinking in English, and we're okay with making a mistake. This is awesome. What else makes someone sound like they're a learner versus a native speaker?
A lot of times it's the small things that make a big difference. One of those things is connected speech.
Connected speech, what's that?
It's basically how sounds blend together when people are just talking naturally. Native speakers often kind of mush words together, almost like they're making one long word.
Gotcha. Can you give us an example?
Sure, like the phrase, I'd decide, a native speaker might say, I'd decide, just connecting the sounds. Or friend egg could sound like friend egg, and sometimes sounds even disappear completely, like the T in next week, which becomes next week.
Wow, I never really thought about it like that. It's like a secret language.
It kind of is, and these little connections might not seem like much, but they're what give English its rhythm and flow. It's what makes it sound smooth and natural.
Okay, so how can we get good at this connected speech thing?
Listening is key. Really pay attention to how native speakers connect their words and phrases, and then try to copy them. You can even find stuff online that explains all the rules of connected speech. The most important thing is to practice, practice, practice.
You got it. Practice makes perfect. Or at least makes us better. Speaking of which, we've covered a lot today. From mimicking mouth movements to being okay with mistakes, and even diving into connected speech. It's pretty clear that there's way more to sounding like a native speaker than just memorizing words. What else should our listeners remember as they start trying to sound more like native speakers?
One thing that people often forget is how important intonation is. It's like the music of language, the way we use our voices to show emotion and meaning.
Can you tell us more about that?
Think of it like a song. The way our voices go up and down can completely change what we're saying, just like the notes in music. Stress and rhythm are super important for making English sound lively and interesting.
So it's not just about saying the words right, it's also about how we say them with the right intonation. Makes sense. Any advice for getting better at intonation?
Absolutely. One of the best things to do is listen to native speakers and then copy them. Pay attention to how they use their voices to emphasize certain words or phrases and how their tone changes with different emotions. Speeches, TED Talks, even songs can be really helpful for this.
So basically surround ourselves with as much spoken English as we can and really tune into those little changes in intonation.
Yep. The more you listen and imitate, the more natural your intonation will become.
Got it. This has been super helpful. I'm starting to understand how all of this works together to create that smooth, effortless flow that makes someone sound like a native English speaker. But let's be honest, sometimes we just want to sound cool to fit in with the locals. Is there a quick way to do that?
Well, if you want to sound like a local, you got to talk like a local. And that means getting into the world of idioms and slang.
Ah, yes. Idioms and slang. Those tricky but awesome expressions that can make you sound like you belong or not.
Exactly. They're like shortcuts to sounding more authentic. They add color and personality to your language, making it less formal and more natural. But of course, with great power comes great responsibility.
I can imagine some of the problems there. Slang can be super specific to a certain situation, right? What's cool to say with your friends might not be cool to say at work.
You're totally right. It's all about using the right words at the right time. And with idioms, you got to make sure you're using them the right way. Otherwise, you might end up sounding confusing instead of cool.
So we're talking about finding a balance. Using idioms and slang to make our language more fun and interesting, but also being aware of the context and not making any big mistakes.
You got it. There are some great resources that can help you figure out idioms and slang, like online dictionaries and forums. But the best way to learn is to listen to native speakers and watch how they use these expressions in different situations.
So immerse ourselves in the language and pay attention to how native speakers use these expressions. It sounds like we keep coming back to that same idea.
You're picking up on the pattern. And here's another important thing to keep in mind. Sounding like a native speaker is more than just pronunciation. It's also about how you deliver your message.
You mean like how fast we talk, how clearly we speak, things like that?
Exactly. It's about speaking clearly and with confidence so people can understand what you're saying. Think of it like the difference between reading a script and giving an awesome performance.
I get it. Being clear and speaking at a good pace is super important for keeping people interested and making sure they understand what you're saying. Are there any exercises we can do to get better at this?
Oh yeah, reading out loud is an awesome way to practice pacing and clarity. Choose a paragraph from a book, an article, or even just something random and read it out loud. Like you're giving a presentation, really focus on speaking clearly and at a natural speed.
So it's like giving a little presentation to ourselves. I can do that. What else can help us sound more like a native speaker?
Well, there's really no substitute for actual conversations. Talking with native speakers is the best way to practice everything we've talked about, to feel comfy with the flow of the language, and to build your confidence.
That makes total sense. But for people who don't know any native speakers, what can they do?
Don't worry, there are tons of resources online that can connect you with native speakers for language exchange or online tutoring. You can find conversation partners, language tutors, even whole online communities that are all about helping people learn and practice English.
That's amazing. So we can create our own little English-speaking world, even if we're not living in an English-speaking country.
Exactly. And the more you chat with native speakers, the more comfortable and confident you'll get. You'll start to pick up on all those little things about pronunciation, intonation, and even body language that really makes someone sound like a native speaker.
I can already feel myself getting more confident just thinking about it. But before we wrap up, is there one last piece of advice you want to give to our listeners who are working on sounding more like native English speakers?
Yeah, definitely. Remember that language is really a tool for connecting with others. It's about building bridges, sharing ideas, and experiencing the world in new ways. Embrace the journey, have fun with it, and never stop exploring how beautiful and diverse the English language is.
That's a beautiful thought, Sarah. Thanks again for being here and sharing your knowledge with us.
It's been fun, Mike.
Okay, so we're back for part 2 of our deep dive into how to sound like a native English speaker. We've learned so much already, and I can't wait to see what else we uncover.
Me too. We've talked about a lot of different things that make someone sound like a native speaker, but it's important to remember that they all kind of work together. Like it's a big puzzle, and every piece is important for seeing the whole picture.
I like that analogy. So how do we put all these pieces together? How do we go from practicing different skills to actually sounding like a native speaker when we're talking to people?
That's where the real magic is. And it all comes down to practicing consistently and not being afraid to use what you've learned. Remember, language isn't just about the rules. It's about connecting with people and expressing yourself.
It's so true. It's easy to get caught up in all the technical stuff and forget that the whole point is to actually use the language. So how do we get over that fear of making mistakes and really start having conversations in English?
Well, first of all, be nice to yourself. Everybody makes mistakes, especially when they're learning something new. In fact, mistakes just mean you're pushing yourself, you're growing and trying new things.
That's a good point. It's easy to feel discouraged when we mess up or feel like we're not improving fast enough.
Totally. But remember, learning a language is a journey, not a race. Celebrate the small things you get right, notice your progress, and don't be afraid to laugh at yourself sometimes.
I love that. Humor is a great way to make those awkward moments less awkward and turn them into something you can learn from. But speaking of learning, what are some practical ways we can get more practice talking with native speakers?
Surround yourself with the language as much as possible. Listen to podcasts, watch movies and TV shows, read books and articles, all in English, of course. The more you hear and see English, the more natural it will start to feel. And don't just be a passive listener. Sing along to your favorite songs, repeat phrases you hear in movies, even talk to yourself in English.
Those are great tips. Sometimes we forget how much we learn just by being around the language. But what about actually having conversations? How do we get comfortable speaking in English, especially if we don't know any native speakers?
There are so many awesome resources online that can help you connect with native speakers for language exchange or online tutoring. You can find conversation partners, tutors, even whole online communities dedicated to helping people learn and practice English.
That's fantastic. So we can basically create our own little English-speaking world, even if we don't live in an English-speaking country.
Precisely. And the more you talk with native speakers, the more comfortable and confident you'll become. You'll start to notice all those little things about pronunciation, intonation, and even body language that truly make someone sound like a native speaker.
I can already feel my confidence growing just thinking about it. But before we finish up, is there one last piece of advice you would give to our listeners who are working on sounding more like native English speakers?
Yes, absolutely. Remember that language is all about connecting with other people. It's about building relationships, sharing ideas, and seeing the world in new ways. Enjoy the process, have fun, and never stop exploring the beauty and diversity of the English language.
That's a beautiful way to put it, Sarah. Thanks again for sharing your wisdom with us.
My pleasure, Mike.
All right, so here we are at the final part of our deep dive into sounding like a native English speaker. It's been an awesome journey so far, and I'm really curious to see where we end up.
Me too.
I know what you might be thinking. Okay, I've heard all these tips. I'm ready to use them, but where do I even begin?
Yeah, it can feel a bit overwhelming at first.
It really can.
But remember what we talked about. Start small, pick like 1 or 2 things that really clicked with you and just concentrate on those.
Right, you don't need to do everything all at once. It's all about finding what works best for you and making your own way of learning.
Exactly. Maybe you really like the idea of mimicking how people move their mouths, so spend some time watching videos and paying close attention to how native speakers make those sounds.
Or maybe you're really into tech, so try out some of those pronunciation apps and see if they help you improve your accent.
Yeah, the important thing is to make it fun. If you're enjoying what you're doing, you're way more likely to stick with it.
Definitely. And don't be afraid to be creative. Put on your favorite English song and try to sing along, really listening to the rhythm and how the singer's voice goes up and down.
Oh, that's a good one.
Or grab a book and read out loud, focusing on speaking clearly and at a good speed.
The more you surround yourself with English, the easier it will be to make it feel natural.
And as you start to feel more confident, go ahead and reach out to those online communities and talk to native speakers.
Those communities can be so helpful and encouraging. Everyone's learning just like you, and they want to help each other out.
Exactly. Speaking of learning, I think it's important to remember that this isn't something you just finish one day. It's a journey that keeps going.
It really is. There's always something new to learn, a new accent, to try out a new way to say what you want to say.
That's what makes it so exciting. And you never know, you might even inspire someone else to start learning English too.
You're absolutely right.
So to wrap up this amazing deep dive, let's go over some of the most important things we've learned.
Okay.
Mimicry, technology, thinking in English. Being okay with making mistakes, connected speech, intonation, idioms, slang, real-life conversations. We've covered so much.
We really have.
And it all comes down to this: be curious, be adventurous, and never stop exploring the English language.
I love that.
You've got this. Every step you take brings you closer to speaking English fluently and naturally.
Well said.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into sounding like a native English speaker.
It's been a great conversation.
I hope you've enjoyed listening and that you feel inspired to keep learning English.
Me too.
Remember, the learning never stops. So keep practicing, keep exploring, and keep having fun with English. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Learn English Lab YouTube channel for more deep dives into the awesome world of English fluency. We'll catch you next time. Welcome back to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and today we're diving into how to speak English, fluently and confidently.
I'm Sarah.
It's great to have you here, Sarah. You're a real pro when it comes to learning languages.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
So for everyone listening, you've decided to boost your English skills. That's awesome. And we're not just talking about textbook stuff, We're talking about speaking smoothly and naturally, like a pro.
Yeah, exactly.
I think one of the biggest things holding people back is, the fear of making mistakes. It could be scary to speak up when you're not totally sure you're getting it right.
Right.
But here's the thing. Even native English speakers, we mess up sometimes. We trip over words, mix up tenses. It happens. What matters most is getting your ideas across.
Totally. And you know what? Research actually shows we learn better when we're not afraid to slip up. Think about how kids learn language. They just dive in, trying out sounds and phrases. It's that fearlessness we want to recapture.
That's such a good point. It's about shifting our focus from being perfect to just communicating, right?
Yeah, focusing on connection.
Okay, so speaking of shifting gears, have you ever heard of this idea of thinking in English?
Absolutely. It's a total game changer for fluency. Instead of translating in your head, you start forming thoughts directly in English. It's like rewiring your brain for smoother, more spontaneous communication.
It sounds almost magical, but how do we actually do that? Like, how do we put it into practice?
Well, there are some really simple things you can try. Start by narrating your day in English, just in your mind. I'm brushing my teeth, I'm making coffee, I'm walking the dog, just creating a running commentary in English.
So instead of just going through the motions, I'm actively thinking about those actions in English.
Exactly. You can also try commenting on your thoughts and feelings in English. This song is beautiful. I'm feeling stressed today.
Interesting. So basically, I'm becoming my own English-speaking narrator.
Precisely. Another helpful thing is to describe objects you see around you. That's a red apple. This chair is comfy.
I can see how all these small things could add up.
They really do. You're creating this constant flow of English in your mind.
Now let's talk about how we sound when we speak English. Pronunciation's important, right? But I've got to say, I love accents. They add so much character to someone's voice.
Me too. Your accent is part of you. It's something to celebrate, not erase.
But are there certain sounds that are really tough for English learners?
Yeah, for sure. It depends on your native language. For example, Spanish speakers often find the th sound tricky, while Japanese speakers might struggle with the L and R sounds.
It's fascinating how our native language influences how we hear and make sounds in another language. So it's not just about learning the sounds themselves, it's like retraining the muscles in our mouths to make them.
Exactly. It's physical as much as mental.
All right, so as we're retraining those muscles and starting to think in English, how do we actually build our vocabulary and, speak in full sentences?
One really good strategy is learning phrases, not just single words. Instead of just memorizing beautiful, you might learn, that's a beautiful sunset, or you have a beautiful smile.
So it's like learning those ready-to-go chunks of language I can use in different situations.
Right. It makes your learning more efficient and helps you sound more natural.
I'm already feeling more confident. So to really sound like native speakers, what about idioms? Those quirky expressions that make the language come alive.
Idioms are awesome. They can be tricky at first, but they make you sound like you've really got a handle on English.
Yeah, like break a leg, which of course doesn't mean to actually break your leg, it means good luck. Or piece of cake, which doesn't involve any cake, but means something is easy.
Great examples. Idioms add humor and color to your English, but it's key to learn them in context and use them the right way.
So where do we find these idioms? I'm guessing movies, TV shows, music are all good places to start.
They are. Immersing yourself in real English content is one of the best ways to learn idioms naturally. Don't be afraid to write them down and try using them in your conversations.
Love it. It's like turning entertainment into a learning opportunity. What about podcasts, especially those made for English learners?
Podcasts are such a great resource. They cover tons of topics and styles, and many are designed specifically to help learners.
I like podcasts that have transcripts so I can read along as I listen and catch any words I miss.
That's a great tip. And some podcasts have exercises or quizzes to test your understanding, which can be really helpful.
Okay, we've got movies, TV shows, podcasts, so many great resources. But what about the ultimate immersion experience? Moving to an English-speaking country.
Living in an English-speaking environment can really speed up your learning. You're constantly surrounded by the language, forced to use it every day. You pick up nuances you might not get in a classroom.
It's like a 2047 language program, but it's also a big decision, not something everyone can do.
Totally. So what if you can't just pack up and move? Are there ways to create immersion while you're traveling?
That's a great question. What do you suggest?
You can totally create an immersive environment right where you are. It's about finding ways to engage with English in your daily life.
Like what specifically?
For example, you could find an English-speaking job or volunteer somewhere where English is the main language.
That's a great way to use your skills and get experience at the same time.
Exactly. Another idea is hosting travelers in your home through websites like Couchsurfing or Airbnb.
That's a fun way to meet people from all over and practice in a casual setting.
And it can be a great cultural exchange.
Of course, we can't forget about technology. There are tons of apps, websites, even just switching your phone settings to English can help.
Tech is definitely a helpful tool. You have dictionaries, translation apps, online platforms, but it's important to find a balance between online learning and real-life interaction.
I agree. While apps are great for vocab and grammar, it's crucial to practice speaking with actual people.
Exactly.
Speaking of practicing, here's a cool tip. It might sound a little strange, but trust me, use a mirror to practice speaking out loud.
A mirror. Tell me more.
I know it might feel silly, but it's actually really effective. You can see your own facial expressions, body language, even your mouth movements, which helps you see where you need to improve.
I see, like having your own personal coach.
Exactly. Plus, you can practice different situations. Giving a presentation, ordering food, having a conversation.
That's a safe space to experiment.
Right. So as we finish up this first part of our deep dive, I want to stress something super important for success in language learning: consistent effort and patience.
Couldn't agree more. It's not about overnight transformations. It's about making steady progress over time.
And celebrating those little victories along the way, right?
Absolutely. Each new word, each conversation, each time you understand a native speaker, those are all wins.
Exactly. It's all about those small wins adding up to big fluency gains.
And remember, setbacks happen. It's okay to have days where you feel stuck. Just get back on track and keep going.
Persistence is key. Ready for the next round of tips?
Absolutely. I'm excited to share more strategies.
So we've covered a lot, from thinking in English to, creating that immersive environment. Now let's get into some specific techniques to really level up those speaking skills.
I like that. Having a toolbox of techniques can be so helpful.
For sure. Let's start with something called shadowing. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah. Shadowing is a great way to improve pronunciation, intonation, even your rhythm.
Sounds kind of mysterious. What is it exactly?
Basically, you're mimicking a native speaker, almost like you're their shadow. You listen to a recording and try to repeat exactly what they're saying, matching their pace and intonation.
So it's like synchronized speaking.
Exactly. It might feel a little awkward at first, but it's amazing for internalizing the sounds and rhythms of natural English.
Makes sense. So I'm not just listening, I'm actively engaging with the language, trying to reproduce it.
Yes, and that active engagement is key. It helps you develop muscle memory, for those sounds and intonation patterns.
So how do I actually do it? Just pick any recording and start repeating?
Well, it's best to start with something short and clear at a pace you can comfortably follow. A podcast, a news report, even a scene from a movie.
Got it. Something manageable.
Right. Repetition is key. Listen, pause, and then try to repeat exactly what you heard. Focus on the sounds, the intonation, even the pauses.
Breaking it down and really focusing on those details.
Yes, as you get more comfortable, you can try longer recordings, more complex ones. Even try shadowing different accents to hear the variety in English pronunciation.
Cool idea. So shadowing is for pronunciation and fluency. What about self-recording? That sounds a bit like talking to myself.
It is a bit like that, but self-recording lets you go back and really listen to yourself, which can be super insightful.
That makes sense. It's hard to judge yourself while you're actually speaking. With self-recording, I can hear how I sound to someone else.
Exactly. You could pick a topic you're interested in, maybe something you've been learning about, and just record yourself talking about it for a few minutes.
Then listen back and analyze it.
Yes. Pay attention to your pronunciation, grammar, how smoothly you speak, your overall clarity. Listen for any mistakes you keep making, any spots where you get stuck.
It's like being my own language coach.
Right. You can also use it to track your progress. It's motivating to see how much you've improved.
I love that. So we talked a bit about practicing with other English learners, but I think it deserves more attention.
Totally. It's so valuable. It creates this safe, supportive space where everyone's in the same boat.
It definitely feels less pressure than talking to a native speaker, especially when you're just starting out.
Absolutely. And you learn so much from each other, sharing tips, strategies, resources. You can even do role-playing together.
And you don't feel as bad about making mistakes because everyone's doing it.
Exactly. Plus, it's fun to connect with others going through the same thing.
So how do you find people to practice with? Are there online communities or groups?
Oh, tons. You could join a language exchange group online or in person. That way you can connect with people learning English who are also native speakers of your language.
Language exchange groups are great. You help each other, it's a win-win.
There are also English conversation clubs at libraries, community centers, sometimes even universities. Often, they're free, and they have a structure for practicing.
Great ideas. And then there are online forums and communities specifically for language learning.
Exactly. You'll find people at your level who want to practice. The key is to be proactive, put yourself out there.
Now let's talk about something that could be a game changer. Your mindset. How you think and feel about language learning can really impact your progress.
Oh, 100%. Mindset is huge. If you believe you can learn English, you're way more likely to succeed.
It's like that saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Exactly. It's not just about believing you can do it. It's about embracing the whole process, the challenges too.
Because learning a language isn't always easy. There will be times when you feel frustrated, maybe you want to give up.
That's normal. Everyone feels that way sometimes. The key is not letting those feelings stop you.
So how do we create a more positive mindset? What are some practical tips?
Well, start by setting realistic goals. Don't try to do too much too soon. Start small, then gradually make things harder as you progress.
I like that. Baby steps.
Another important one is focusing on your progress, not your mistakes.
It's easy to get hung up on those mistakes and feel discouraged.
It is, but remember, mistakes are normal. They're actually how we learn and grow.
So instead of beating myself up, I should see them as feedback, showing me where to improve.
Exactly, and don't forget to celebrate your wins, no matter how small they seem.
Yes, those little wins add up and keep you going. What are some other ways to stay positive and motivated on this journey?
Surrounding yourself with positive people can make a huge difference. Connect with other learners, share experiences, encouragement.
Having a support system is so important. What about finding resources that inspire you? Like a favorite podcast, a YouTube channel, maybe a book about language learning.
That's a great idea. Those resources can give you a boost, especially when you're feeling stuck.
And they often offer practical tips.
Exactly. It's about finding what works for you and creating a learning environment that feels good and motivating.
Before we move on, I want to talk about self-compassion.
Self-compassion, so vital. It's being kind to yourself, especially when you mess up or things get tough.
Because let's be real, learning a language can be hard. It's easy to be tough on yourself.
Especially when you compare yourself to others or to, some ideal of a perfect speaker.
So true. But everyone learns at their own pace.
And everyone has strengths and weaknesses. So instead of being hard on yourself, be patient.
Offer yourself the same kindness you offer a friend who is struggling.
Yes. Recognize that you're human, and this takes time, effort, and a lot of self-love.
So we've covered active learning techniques like shadowing and self-recording, the power of practicing with others, and having a positive mindset. Ready for the final stretch?
Bring it on.
Awesome. We've focused on internal strategies, but now I want to talk about external things you can do to create an environment that supports your learning.
Love that. Our environment plays a huge role in our success.
It really does. Okay, let's start simple. Surround yourself with English.
Immersion, immersion, immersion.
Exactly. Now, we talked about living in an English-speaking country, but there are tons of ways to create that immersion right where you are.
Absolutely. Find those opportunities to expose yourself to the language as much as possible.
So what are some practical ways to do that?
One of the simplest is changing the language settings on your devices to English. Your phone, computer, tablet, everything.
That's so smart.
It is. It might feel weird at first, but you adapt quickly. You're constantly seeing English, even if you're just checking email or scrolling through social media.
It's like passive learning in the background. And then there's English music and podcasts.
Music and podcasts are amazing, entertaining, and educational.
And there's something for everyone. Whether you're into pop, classical, true crime, comedy, you'll find something you enjoy in English.
And you can listen while you do other things like commute, workout, even chores.
Multitasking for language learning.
Exactly. And don't forget about movies and TV shows.
Ah, the classics. They're great for listening comprehension, and you learn different accents, slang, cultural stuff.
And with all the streaming services, there's so much to choose from.
And subtitles can be really helpful, especially when you're starting out.
Absolutely. As you get better, you can try turning them off or even use English subtitles to reinforce your reading.
Good strategy. Okay, what about reading?
Reading is so important for building vocabulary, understanding grammar, seeing different writing styles.
And it can be really relaxing.
Totally. What are some of your favorite things to read in English?
I love novels and short stories. They're immersive. You get lost in the story.
And there are so many genres to choose from. What about nonfiction?
Nonfiction is great too. You learn about new topics and build vocabulary in specific areas. History, science, business, anything you're interested in.
And English news websites and blogs are great for staying up to date and seeing different writing styles.
And for practicing reading comprehension.
Yes. So we've talked about passive immersion, but what about actually speaking English in your daily life? That's where it all comes together.
Absolutely. It's one thing to understand, but using it in real life is where the magic happens. So how do we create those opportunities?
Well, joining an English conversation group is a great way to start. We talked about them before, but they're worth mentioning again.
For sure. They're relaxed, supportive, and often led by experienced teachers who can give feedback.
Finding a language exchange partner is another good option.
Language partners are great. You help each other practice in a more personalized setting.
And it's fun. You connect with someone from a different culture.
Now let's talk about something that can be intimidating, but also really rewarding. Putting yourself in situations where you have to speak English with native speakers.
That's where the real growth happens.
It's where you test your skills, see how far you've come, and really experience the language in action.
It can be nerve-wracking, but it's also super motivating.
So what are some tips for handling those situations?
Well, remember, everyone makes mistakes. It's part of the process.
Native speakers get that you're learning, and they're usually patient.
Start small. Don't try to have a super complex conversation right away.
Like ordering food, asking for directions, making small talk with a cashier, those everyday interactions.
Exactly. And let people know you're learning.
That's a good point. Most people are happy to help. They might even slow down or use simpler language.
Right. And don't be afraid to ask if you don't understand something.
Way better to ask than to pretend you get it.
Exactly. And remember, making mistakes is okay. Don't let fear stop you from speaking.
The more you speak, the better you get. Okay, let's talk about travel, the ultimate immersion experience.
Ah, travel. There's no better way to immerse yourself in the language and culture.
You're constantly surrounded by English, so many chances to practice.
Any tips for making the most of travel for language learning?
First, choose a place you're genuinely interested in.
Makes sense. If you're excited about the place, you'll be more motivated to talk to people.
And don't be afraid to go beyond the tourist spots.
Love that. Explore those less touristy areas. You might meet locals who don't speak English as well, which can be a good challenge.
And it's a more authentic experience.
Think about doing activities that involve speaking English. A cooking class, a guided tour, maybe even volunteering.
That gives you a structured setting to practice, and you'll be with people who are also interested in learning or sharing their culture.
Exactly. And just chat with people at cafes, restaurants, shops, museums. Ask for recommendations, share stories.
Those casual conversations can be so memorable.
They really can. Before we wrap up this section, let's talk about support.
Support is crucial. Learning a language can be tough. It's so much easier with people who encourage you.
Absolutely. How do you find that support?
Connecting with other learners is huge. We've talked about this, but it's worth repeating.
Definitely. Whether it's an online forum, a conversation club, or even just chatting with other learners, those connections are valuable.
You share experiences, tips, encouragement. You learn from each other's mistakes.
And celebrate each other's wins.
What about finding a mentor or tutor?
Mentors and tutors are amazing. They give you guidance, feedback, encouragement.
And they keep you accountable and motivated. They can offer a different perspective, too.
What about support from family and friends?
They can be the best cheerleaders.
Even if they don't speak English, they can still be supportive, encouraging, and help create a good learning environment at home.
Exactly. They can help you make time for studying, be patient when you're frustrated, and celebrate your successes. Having that support makes a world of difference. So let's talk about common mistakes English learners make and, more importantly, how to avoid them.
I love that idea. Knowing those common pitfalls can help us stay on track.
For sure. So let's start with one I see all the time. Translating word for word from your native language.
Ah, the word-for-word trap. So tempting, but it can make your sentences sound really unnatural.
It can. English grammar and sentence structure are different from other languages, so those direct translations don't always work.
And it makes it harder to think in English, which we talked about earlier.
How do we avoid falling into that trap?
Focus on learning phrases and chunks of language, not just individual words.
We talked about that, but it's worth repeating. Seeing language as building blocks, not isolated words.
Yes, when you learn phrases, you're internalizing the grammar too, not just the words.
It's like learning in context, which makes it stick better.
Another tip is to pay attention to how English actually sounds. The patterns, the rhythm.
That natural flow native speakers have.
Right, listen to how they phrase things, where they emphasize words, how they connect ideas.
And don't be afraid to imitate them. Mimicry is a great learning tool.
It is. The more you hear real English, the more you'll internalize those patterns. Okay, another common mistake. Being afraid to speak.
Oh yeah, the fear of speaking. A big roadblock for a lot of learners.
It's understandable. Putting yourself out there can be scary, especially when you're not confident.
But it's like learning to ride a bike. You can't just read about it, you have to actually do it.
Exactly. And the more you speak, the easier it gets.
What are some tips for getting over that fear?
Find a safe, supportive place to practice.
Like a conversation group, or even just a friend or family member who'll listen and encourage you.
Right. Find people who won't judge you and will support you.
And remember, everyone makes mistakes. It's how we learn.
The key is not letting those mistakes stop you. See them as learning opportunities.
Don't be afraid to start small. You don't have to jump into a big, complicated conversation.
Exactly. Start with greetings, introductions, simple, everyday phrases.
And as you get more confident, you can make your conversations longer and more complex. Okay, let's talk about another mistake. Focusing too much on grammar.
The grammar trap. It's easy to get so caught up in the rules that you forget the main goal, which is communication.
So true. Grammar is important, but it shouldn't be the only thing you focus on. How do we find that balance?
Remember that fluency is about communicating effectively, even if your grammar isn't perfect.
So it's okay to make a few mistakes as long as people understand you.
Exactly. Even native speakers make grammar mistakes.
That's true. It's more about the overall flow and clarity.
And don't be afraid to experiment.
I like that. Try out new words, even if you're not totally sure if you're using them right.
The more you experiment, the more you learn. You'll start to get a feel for how the language works.
Now let's talk about using language that's too formal.
Ah, yes, the textbook English problem. It's easy to sound stiff and unnatural, especially if you've learned mainly from textbooks.
Textbooks are good for the basics, but they don't always reflect how people really talk.
So how do we avoid sounding like a textbook?
What are your thoughts?
Listen to how native speakers actually speak. Pay attention to the phrases, the tone, the flow.
Movies, TV shows, podcasts, even listening to conversations at a cafe can help.
Totally. And don't be shy about using those phrases yourself.
Another tip, practice speaking in different contexts.
Great idea. Instead of just formal stuff, try role-playing different situations.
Like ordering coffee, asking for directions, chatting about your weekend.
Those real-life situations help you develop a more natural way of speaking. And don't forget about contractions.
Ah, contractions. Those make English sound so much more natural.
Exactly. I'm going to instead of I am going to. Can't instead of cannot.
Small changes, big difference. Okay, another mistake, not asking for help when you need it.
It's easy to feel stuck or embarrassed about not knowing something.
But everyone needs help sometimes.
Absolutely. Asking for help shows that you're serious about learning and that you're not afraid to ask for guidance.
So if you're struggling with grammar, pronunciation, or just need someone to practice with, don't hesitate to ask.
Talk to a teacher, a tutor, a language exchange partner, even a friend or family member who's good at English.
There are lots of people who are happy to help.
And last but not least, be patient with yourself.
Patience is crucial.
It's a journey, not a race. Fluency takes time and effort.
It's easy to get discouraged when you don't see results right away, but remember, it's a gradual process.
There will be ups and downs, plateaus, times when you feel like you're not making progress.
Just trust the process. Be kind to yourself.
Celebrate those small wins and take breaks when you need them.
Every little bit counts. So we've talked about common mistakes like translating word for word, fear of speaking, focusing too much on grammar, using formal language, not asking for help, and impatience. And we've discussed ways to avoid those pitfalls.
Knowing those common mistakes can really make a difference.
Absolutely. Before we move on, I want to touch on one more thing, making learning fun.
Fun is so important. When we enjoy it, we're more likely to stick with it.
So true. And there are so many ways to make it fun.
What are some of your favorites?
I always try to find resources that match my interests.
I love that. If you like music, listen to English songs.
Right. If you like movies, watch English movies and TV shows. If you like reading, read English books.
It shouldn't feel like work, it should feel like a hobby.
Another tip, set yourself little challenges.
Challenges are fun, like learning 5 new words every day or watching a whole movie without subtitles.
Those challenges keep you motivated and make it more rewarding. And games.
Games are awesome for learning English.
They are. There are so many online, in app stores, even in textbooks.
And they make learning feel like playing.
Exactly. You can practice vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation without feeling like you're studying.
Try using English in creative ways in your daily life.
I love that, like writing your grocery list in English.
Exactly. Or have a little conversation with yourself in the shower in English.
Or narrate your day in your head in English.
Find those little chances to use English every day.
And don't take yourself too serious.
That's so important. Laugh at yourself, make mistakes, just enjoy it.
Learning a language should be joyful.
It should. Embrace the journey, find what you enjoy, and have fun with it.
Ready for the grand finale.
Yes. Bring on the final words of wisdom.
Okay, so we've covered a ton in this deep dive. Practice, immersion, mindset, common mistakes, making it fun. Before we finish, I want to leave you with some key takeaways.
Love those. They help solidify those important lessons.
So let's start with one we've been talking about all along, consistency.
Consistency is key. It's not about studying for hours all at once. It's about making English a regular part of your life.
Exactly. Even a few minutes a day makes a difference.
Find a routine that works for you and stick with it.
Listen to a podcast, read a few pages of a book, chat with a language partner. Those consistent efforts really pay off.
And it's okay to have off days.
Life happens. There will be times when you can't stick to your routine.
Don't beat yourself up. Just get back on track as soon as you can.
Don't lose sight of those goals. Another key takeaway, embracing mistakes.
Mistakes are our friends. They're learning opportunities.
So true. Instead of seeing them as failures, see them as stepping stones.
Every mistake teaches you something new.
And brings you closer to fluency.
So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Learn from them and keep going.
Another important one, finding your voice.
Finding your voice. I love that.
It's about embracing your own personality and style as an English speaker.
You don't have to sound like a textbook, lose your accent, or be perfect.
Be yourself. Express yourself authentically and confidently.
And find the joy in it.
Let your personality shine through, have fun, be creative.
And one more, celebrate your successes.
Celebrating is so important. It's easy to focus on the challenges and forget how far you've come.
Take time to appreciate your progress, no matter how small.
So every new word, every conversation, every time you understand a movie without subtitles, celebrate.
Pat yourself on the back, treat yourself, share your excitement with someone.
Those celebrations keep you motivated.
They do. Before we wrap up, I have one final thought.
Ooh, a final thought. Love it.
Learning English is more than just a new skill.
It's about opening up new possibilities.
Exactly. Connecting with people, exploring new ideas, expanding your world.
It makes your life richer.
So embrace the journey, be patient, and never stop learning.
Beautiful. Sarah, it's been awesome having you on the show.
Thank you. It's been great sharing these tips.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us. Remember, you've got this. Keep practicing, keep learning, and never give up on your dreams.
And if you liked this episode, please like, share, and subscribe to the Learn English Lab for more great tips on mastering English. See you next time.
Until then, happy learning. It's like having a built-in cheerleader, you know? Someone to help you stay motivated and remind you why you started this journey in the first place.
Exactly. And speaking of creating a supportive environment, let's talk about something we've touched on before, immersion. How can our listeners really immerse themselves in English, even if they're not living in an English-speaking country?
Yeah, what are some creative ways to make that happen?
Well, one super simple thing is to change the language settings on all your devices to English. Phone, computer, tablet, the whole shebang.
That's a sneaky good one. You're constantly exposed to English without even realizing it.
Exactly. You might feel a little lost at first, but you'll be surprised how quickly you adjust. Plus, you're passively absorbing new vocabulary and grammar every time you use your devices.
It's like learning on autopilot. And of course, we can't forget about all the fun stuff, movies, TV shows, music, podcasts.
Oh, absolutely. Not only are they super entertaining, but they're also a goldmine for authentic language input.
There's literally something for everyone, whether you're into action movies, romantic comedies, historical dramas, documentaries, you name it. You'll find something you enjoy in English.
And don't underestimate the power of music. Listening to English songs is such a fun way to pick up new words, work on your pronunciation, and just, vibe with the language.
Plus, you might discover some amazing new artists. Speaking of expanding your horizons, what about reading?
Reading is essential for any language learner. It's like a workout for your vocabulary, grammar, and overall understanding of how the language works.
And just like with movies and music, there's a whole universe of English literature out there to explore.
Totally. Classic novels, contemporary thrillers, biographies, self-help books, anything you can think of, you'll find it in English.
I love getting lost in a good book. And it's even better when it's helping me learn English at the same time.
And don't forget about news websites and blogs.
Ah, yeah. Those are great for staying up to date on current events and for seeing different writing styles.
Plus, I often cover a wide range of topics, so you're bound to find something that interests you.
Okay, let's shift gears for a bit. What about putting yourself in situations where you have to speak English with native speakers? That can be a little scary, but also super exciting.
It's definitely where the rubber meets the road. It's your chance to put everything you've learned into practice and see how far you've come.
It can be nerve-wracking, for sure, but also incredibly rewarding.
So any tips for approaching those situations with confidence?
Well, remember that everyone makes mistakes. Native speakers understand that you're learning, and they're usually super patient and encouraging.
It's true. Most people are happy to help.
Another tip, start small. You don't have to jump into a deep conversation right away.
Exactly. Simple things like ordering food, asking for directions, or making small talk with a cashier are great starting points.
And as you get more comfortable, you can gradually work your way up to more challenging conversations.
And don't be afraid to ask for clarification if you don't understand something. It's way better to ask than to pretend to get it and miss out on important information.
So true. Now, what about travel? For a lot of people, that's the ultimate immersion experience.
Oh, absolutely. Traveling to an English-speaking country is like diving headfirst into the language and culture.
It's a fantastic way to practice your speaking skills, interact with native speakers, and make memories that will last a lifetime.
Any tips for making the most of travel for language learning?
Well, first and foremost, choose a destination that really speaks to you, a place you're genuinely excited to explore.
Makes total sense. That passion will make you even more eager to connect with people and use your English.
And don't be afraid to go beyond those typical tourist hotspots. Venture off the beaten path a bit.
I love that. You're more likely to meet locals who might not be as fluent in English, which can be a great challenge.
And you'll get a more authentic experience of the culture.
For sure. Another tip, plan activities that involve speaking English, like taking a cooking class, joining a guided tour, or even volunteering.
Those kinds of activities provide a structured setting for practicing your speaking skills and connecting with people who share your interests.
Exactly. All right, as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave our listeners with some final thoughts that I think are absolutely key for achieving fluency and confidence in English.
Ooh, I'm all ears.
First things first, remember that learning a language is a journey, not a destination. There will be bumps along the way, challenges, setbacks, but also incredible moments of growth and discovery.
It's all about the process and enjoying the ride.
Exactly. Be patient with yourself, celebrate your progress, and never, ever give up on your dreams.
And remember, making mistakes is not a failure. It's a sign that you're learning and growing.
It's all part of the process. Embrace those mistakes. See them as stepping stones to fluency.
And most importantly, find joy in the journey.
Yes. Find what inspires you, what makes you excited about English, and let that passion fuel your learning.
Beautifully said, Sarah. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today.
The pleasure was all mine, Mike. I've loved sharing these tips with your listeners.
And to all of our amazing listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into how to speak English fluently and confidently. Remember, you've got this. Keep practicing, keep learning, and keep believing in yourself.
And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Learn English Lab for more awesome tips and tricks to help you on your English learning journey.
We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, happy learning. Welcome back to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and I'm super excited to be chatting with Sarah today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Sarah, you're a real expert when it comes to communication.
I try my best.
So today we're going to dive into a topic that I think, honestly, kind of freaks a lot of us out.
I know exactly what you mean.
Starting conversations with strangers, like how do you even...
Right. It can be scary, but I think for a lot of people, it's that fear of the unknown. You know?
Totally. Like, what if they think I'm weird or something?
But here's the thing. It really is a skill you can learn. And the more you practice it, the easier it gets, I promise.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better already. But where do we even begin?
I'd say the most important thing is confidence.
Confidence, huh? Even if you don't exactly feel it.
Even if you have to fake it a little bit at first. Because seriously, when you act confidently, your brain starts to catch up.
Wait, really?
Yeah. It's kind of like you're tricking your mind into believing it.
So it's like that whole fake it till you make it thing.
Exactly. And I've seen it work wonders, I'm telling you.
I like that. I guess it's kind of like the saying action cures fear, right?
Oh, 100%. The longer you hesitate, the more time you have to overthink things.
And overthinking never leads to anything good.
Oh, definitely not. Especially when it comes to social situations.
Right. Like you said, it's that fear of what other people are thinking.
Which, let's be honest, is often way more in our heads than reality.
So true. We build up these scenarios in our minds that probably never even happen.
People are usually way too focused on themselves to be judging us as harshly as we think.
Okay, that's good to remember. So confidence is key. But what's like a practical first step to actually get a conversation going?
A friendly greeting goes a long way. Seriously.
Like what? Just, hi.
Well, yeah. But with a genuine smile, you know. Make eye contact, introduce yourself quickly, maybe even offer a handshake.
Keep it simple.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm friendly and approachable.
I like that. Straightforward and to the point. Okay, but how do you keep a conversation going once you've broken the ice? Any tips to avoid those awkward silences?
Having a few questions ready can be a lifesaver, trust me.
So like do your homework.
Sort of. Just think of a couple of things you could ask beforehand. That way you're not, like, scrambling for something to say in the moment.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of questions that usually work well?
Oh, tons. I mean, even something as simple as asking for directions or recommendations can be a great way to start chatting.
Like, hey, do you know a good coffee shop around here?
Exactly. Or like, is this your first time at this event? Just something to get the ball rolling.
Simple but effective. I like it.
What's really key is to ask open-ended questions.
Open-ended.
Yeah. Instead of questions that just get a yes or no answer, try to ask things that encourage the other person to actually talk a bit more.
So instead of, is it cold out today? I could say, what do you think of this crazy weather we've been having?
There you go. You're giving them a chance to share their thoughts.
And people love to share their thoughts, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. And, there's a reason for that.
I'm all ears.
It's not just about ego, like people just wanting to talk about themselves. It's actually deeper than that. When we share our experiences, it helps us feel seen and heard.
Whoa. So it's like a fundamental human need.
Exactly. It validates our existence and helps us connect with others.
I never thought of it that way. So it's not just about getting them talking. It's actually like fulfilling a basic human need for connection.
You got it. And that's why, even more than asking the right questions, it's so important to be a good listener.
Oh, for sure. Like actually paying attention to what the other person is saying.
Yep. Make eye contact, nod along, ask follow-up questions, show them you're genuinely interested.
So you're creating a space where they feel comfortable sharing.
Exactly. You're building that bridge of understanding between you two.
That's beautiful. So we've got the open-ended questions. We're being good listeners. What else can we do to keep a conversation flowing smoothly?
One thing that can really help is looking for common ground. It's amazing how even something tiny can spark a connection and make a conversation feel more, comfortable.
Like what? Give me an example.
It could be anything. The weather, the music playing in the background, even just a shared observation about the event you're both at.
Oh, I see. Like, hey, we're both experiencing this together.
Exactly. It's an instant bond.
So it doesn't have to be some deep philosophical thing.
Nope. Sometimes the simplest things are the best conversation starters. And another thing, don't be afraid of a little silence.
Silence.
Yeah. It's okay if there's a pause every now and then.
But isn't that like the ultimate awkward moment?
Not necessarily. Sometimes people just need a moment to think, It can actually be a good thing.
Like a chance to take a breath.
Exactly. And don't put so much pressure on yourself to be perfect. It's a conversation, not a performance.
Oh, that's a good point. I definitely get caught up in trying to say the right thing sometimes.
We all do. But honestly, it's the imperfections that make conversations interesting.
You know what? I think you're right. So embrace the awkward moments.
Absolutely. And even if a conversation doesn't go perfectly, it's still a learning experience. Every interaction helps you get a little bit better for next time.
So it's all about viewing those so-called failures as stepping stones to success.
Yes. Think about it. Every athlete, musician, artist, they all had to practice for hours and hours, making tons of mistakes along the way before they got really good.
Wow, that's a great analogy. So we shouldn't beat ourselves up if every conversation isn't a home run.
Exactly. Each interaction is valuable data. It helps you refine your approach and build your confidence over time.
I'm really starting to see the power of this mindset shift. Instead of fearing failure,
Yeah.
we can actually learn from it.
Now you're getting it. And honestly, not every conversation has to be some deep, meaningful exchange. Some will be amazing, some will be a bit awkward, and that's okay.
So the key is to just keep practicing and keep learning.
Exactly. And have fun with it. That's the most important part.
Speaking of making a good impression, have you found that compliments can be a good way to break the ice?
Oh, they can be fantastic. But the key is to be genuine.
What do you mean?
Well, you want to avoid those generic compliments that could apply to anyone, you know? Instead of just saying, nice shoes, try something more specific like, those shoes are so unique. I love that color.
So it shows you're actually paying attention.
Exactly. You're acknowledging something that you genuinely appreciate about them.
That makes sense. And what's a good way to keep the conversation going after a compliment?
You could ask a follow-up question, like, where did you get those shoes? I've been looking for something similar.
I see. It keeps things flowing naturally.
And it shows that you're truly interested in what they have to say. And you know what else can really help make a conversation more enjoyable?
With that.
Humor. A little bit of laughter can go a long way.
Oh, absolutely. A well-placed joke or a funny observation can really lighten the mood.
Totally. But of course, there's a fine line between being funny and being offensive.
Right. You don't want to cross any lines.
So be mindful of the context, the person you're talking to, their cultural background. You want to make sure the humor is appropriate for the situation.
So read the room.
Yeah. But even if you're not, like, a comedian, you can still use humor in subtle ways. A playful tone of voice, maybe a self-deprecating comment, even just laughing together at an awkward moment, those things can create a connection.
I like that. It takes the pressure off.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, authenticity is key.
People can spot a phony a mile away.
Right. So just relax, be yourself, and let your natural charm shine through.
This has been so insightful already, Sarah. You've given us so much to think about.
I'm glad you think so.
Before we wrap up part 1 of this deep dive, do you have any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
You know, one thing that I think is super valuable when you're trying to start conversations is learning to read social cues.
Social cues? Like, what do you mean?
It's all about paying attention to the nonverbal signals people are sending, like their body language, their facial expressions, all that.
So like being a human lie detector.
Not exactly. It's more like tuning in to those unspoken messages that can tell you a lot about how someone is feeling.
Okay, I think I get it. So like, if someone's got their arms crossed and they're not making eye contact, that probably means they don't want to chat, right?
Exactly. That could be a sign that they're feeling a bit closed off or maybe just not in the mood to socialize.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
So what are some other things we should be looking for?
Well, on the flip side, if someone's smiling, making eye contact, maybe even leaning in towards you when you're talking, those are good signs that they're open to a conversation.
So it's all about reading those little hints.
Yep. And it's amazing how much you can learn about someone just by paying attention to their nonverbal communication.
I never really thought about it like that. So reading social cues helps us figure out who to approach.
Right. And also how to approach them.
Oh, interesting. So like adjusting your style based on how they're acting.
Exactly. Some people are more outgoing, some are more reserved. You want to kind of match their energy, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. So if someone seems really shy, I probably shouldn't come on too strong, Red.
Probably not. You want to be more gentle, maybe ask some open-ended questions to get them talking.
And if someone's super chatty and energetic?
Then you can be a bit more playful and energetic too. Just feel the vibe and go with it.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. It's like being a social chameleon.
Huh. In a way, yeah. It's all about being adaptable and reading the situation.
This is great stuff, Sarah.
Thanks, and remember, everyone's different, so there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. There's no magic formula.
But the more you practice, the better you'll get at reading people and adjusting your style accordingly.
And the less scary it'll feel, right?
Yeah.
Because I think for a lot of people, it's that fear of the unknown that really holds them back.
Oh, definitely. But you know what? Not every conversation has to be a masterpiece.
Wait, really?
Seriously, some will be great, some will be awkward, and that's totally normal.
I guess it's like anything else in life.
Exactly. You can't hit a home run every time.
Okay, that makes me feel better. So even if a conversation doesn't go perfectly, it's not the end of the world.
Nope. It's just a learning experience.
So we shouldn't be afraid to make mistakes.
Not at all. Embrace the stumbles, learn from them, and move on to the next conversation.
I think that's a really important point. Because I know I tend to overanalyze things after a conversation that didn't go well.
We all do it. But honestly, the more you practice, the less you'll worry about those little slip-ups.
I like that. So it's all about progress, not perfection.
Yes. And remember, Even if you only have one amazing conversation out of 10 attempts, that one connection could be life-changing.
Whoa, that's a powerful thought. So don't give up after a few awkward encounters.
Exactly. Keep practicing, keep learning, and who knows who you might meet along the way.
Speaking of awkward encounters, I think one thing that holds a lot of people back is the fear of rejection.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Like, what if someone just totally blows me off?
Well, first of all, remember, it's not always personal.
Wait, what? How can it not be personal if someone doesn't want to talk to me?
Well, maybe they're having a bad day, or they're super busy, or they're just not in a social mood.
So it doesn't necessarily mean I did anything wrong?
Nope. It could be a million different things that have nothing to do with you.
Okay. I guess that makes sense. But it's still kind of hard not to take it personally, you know?
No, I totally get it. But the key is to just shrug it off and move on.
Don't dwell on it.
Exactly. Focus on the next opportunity to connect.
Easier said than done, but I'll try.
And remember, the more you put yourself out there, the less power that fear of rejection will have over you.
So it's like facing your fears.
Kind of. It's like building up an immunity to it.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Because it does feel kind of scary sometimes.
It's normal to feel that way. But trust me, the more you do it, the easier it gets.
I'm definitely seeing a pattern here. Practice, practice, practice.
You got it. And even if things don't always go perfectly, it's all part of the learning process.
You've been so helpful, Sarah. I feel like I'm starting to get a handle on all this.
I'm happy to hear that. And one thing I always tell people is that conversation is a journey, not a destination.
Oh, that's deep. What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's something you keep learning and refining throughout your whole life.
So there's always room for improvement.
Absolutely. And the more you practice, the more comfortable and confident you'll become.
So what are some practical ways we can, incorporate all this stuff into our daily lives?
Well, challenge yourself to strike up a conversation with at least one stranger every day.
Every day.
Yeah, it could be anyone. The barista at your coffee shop, someone in line at the grocery store, whoever.
So just be more open to those random interactions.
Exactly. The more you do it, the more natural it will feel.
This is really eye-opening. I'm starting to see the world as, one giant conversation playground.
I love that because that's what it is, There are so many opportunities to connect with interesting people if we just open ourselves up to it.
I never thought of it that way before. It's actually kind of exciting.
It is, and you never know what amazing things might happen when you step outside your comfort zone and strike up a conversation with someone new.
Well said, Sarah. This has been an incredible conversation.
Thanks, Mike. I've really enjoyed it.
I know our listeners are eager to hear more, so we'll be right back with the final part of our deep dive into starting conversations with strangers after a quick break. And we're back, still diving deep into the art of chatting with strangers.
Always happy to talk about connection.
So Sarah, in these last few minutes, let's get really practical, okay?
Sounds good to me.
Imagine you're at a networking event, surrounded by people you don't know. How do you actually use all this advice we've been talking about to strike up conversations?
Well, first off, remember those basics we covered earlier. Confidence, smiling, making eye contact. All those things really do make a difference.
They set the stage.
Exactly. Then look for those little opportunities to approach people. Maybe there's a group that seems open and welcoming. Or maybe you spot someone standing alone looking a little lost.
Sometimes I think we assume people standing alone want to be left alone.
You're right about that. Sometimes they're the ones who need a friendly face the most.
Makes sense.
You could even just say something like, "Hey, these events can be a little overwhelming. Mind if I join you?"
That's a good one. Simple and disarming.
And once you've broken the ice, remember all those great conversation starters we talked about? Ask them about their work, their interests, even just their thoughts on the event itself.
And don't forget those genuine compliments.
Oh yes, compliments are a fantastic way to show you're paying attention.
I really enjoyed your presentation earlier. Something like that.
Perfect. Just remember to be specific. Avoid those generic phrases that could apply to anyone.
Okay, got it. So we've talked about networking events, but what about more casual, everyday situations? Like at a coffee shop or in line at the grocery store.
Same principles apply,
Yeah.
Look for those little openings, those shared moments that can spark a conversation.
Like if you see someone reading a book you love.
Exactly. Or maybe they're wearing a shirt from your favorite band. Use those things as springboards.
I think a lot of us overthink it, We worry about bothering people or interrupting them. But honestly, most people are pretty open to a little friendly chat.
I agree. I think we tend to underestimate how much people actually crave connection.
It's all about taking that first step.
Right. Exactly. And who knows what amazing conversations and connections are waiting out there.
I love that, Sarah. Well, this has been such an enlightening conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure, Mike. Thanks for having me.
And to all our amazing listeners out there, remember, practice makes progress. Don't be afraid to put yourselves out there. And most importantly, have fun with it.
And if you're looking for a little challenge, try picking one tip from today's episode and commit to using it this week. You might be surprised at how easy and rewarding it can be to strike up conversations with new people.
I love that challenge. So to wrap things up, don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into all sorts of fascinating topics. And be sure to share this episode with your friends so we can help spread the joy of connection far and wide.
Thanks for joining us on the Learn English Lab. Keep those conversations flowing, and we'll see you next time.
Hello and welcome to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and I am so pumped for our deep dive today. We're going to be tackling something that's near and dear to all of us, family, and how to talk about them in English. You know, trying to explain your family in a new language can feel like, well, it can feel like you're trying to put together like one of those ready to assemble, you know, those bookshelves or something with instructions that are in a language that you just don't understand. But don't worry, because today we're going to break it all down, and we're going to have you chatting about your family like a native English speaker in absolutely no time. And to help us navigate this linguistic labyrinth, we have with us the one and only Sarah, who is basically like the guru when it comes to just making English conversation flow. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I'm glad to be here.
All right, so before we jump into all the specifics here, I have a confession to make. I once tried to describe my extended family to a friend, and I got so tripped up on like second cousins, once removed, and great somethings. It was just a comedy of errors. I'm sure some of you listening right now, you can probably relate to that feeling of just being like, oh my gosh, what are the words? So Sarah, are you ready to help us ditch the confusion?
Yeah.
And master the art of talking about family?
Absolutely. Let's do this.
Awesome. So let's start with some of the basics here. When you're first getting to know someone, what are some of the questions about family that might come up?
I think people are generally curious about the size of your family. Like, how many people are in your family? What kind of family do you come from?
Right. So it's like we're laying the foundation for the family portrait.
Yeah.
And to do that, we might use words like small family, big family, nuclear family, single parent family, or extended family, to kind of describe our crew.
Yeah, exactly. And you could say something like, there are 5 of us in my family, my parents, my 2 siblings, and me. Or if you have a really big family, you could say, I have a huge extended family with lots of aunts, uncles, and cousins.
I love it. And this is where things can get pretty interesting, right? Because the idea of what a typical family is definitely changing all the time. You know, the term nuclear family, I think people still use it. But it doesn't really capture the diversity of family structures that we see today. What are your thoughts on that, Sarah?
I totally agree. We're seeing more blended families, same-sex parents, multi-generational households, and just all these different kinds of families. So nuclear family, I mean, it's still part of our vocabulary, but it's important to remember that that's just one type of family.
That's such an important point, because language really needs to adapt to the changing ways that we live and connect with each other. Okay, so we've established kind of the overall landscape of the family, but what about introducing the individual players, the specific members of our families? How do we do that smoothly in English?
Well, I would say the most natural starting point is with your immediate family, your parents, siblings, spouse, and children. For example, you could say, my father is a teacher and my mother is a doctor. Or I have an older sister who's an engineer and a younger brother who's still in college.
Okay, that makes sense. But is there a bit of a cultural difference when it comes to talking about parents in English?
Yeah, there is actually. English speakers generally don't use their parents' names when they're talking about them. So instead of saying, my mother Mary loves to garden, you would just say, my mother loved to garden.
Okay. So it's these little nuances that are so important to pick up on as you're learning a new language. It's really fascinating how language reflects those cultural norms. Okay, so what about those sometimes tricky sibling relationships? How do we express things like birth order clearly in English?
I would say the most common way is to use the terms older and younger. You can also use eldest for the oldest sibling, and youngest for the youngest. So you could say, for instance, I'm the middle child with an older brother and a younger sister.
Now that brings back memories. I remember when I was learning English, I always mixed up elder and older. I remember telling someone once, my sister is 2 years elder than me, and they just looked at me like I was speaking another language, which I guess I was.
English can be a bit quirky sometimes, I know.
It definitely can. It's all part of the fun of learning a language, right?
Exactly.
Those little victories and aha moments along the way. So we've covered the immediate family. But what about those relatives who might live a little bit further away, like our grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins?
Yeah, we're moving into extended family territory now. And here's a fun fact. English uses single words like aunt and uncle, where other languages might have separate words, depending on whether the aunt or uncle is on your mother's side or your father's side.
Oh, I see. So we don't have to worry about all those extra terms. Okay, good to know. But let's be honest here. Just listing out names and relationships doesn't really give us a vivid picture of our family. It's kind of like having a bare bones outline without any of the color or the details.
Yeah, I agree. To make your descriptions more interesting, you want to add some details about their appearance and personality.
Okay, so let's go beyond just saying, like, my dad is tall. Give us some more interesting ways to describe physical appearance in English.
I think the key is to choose words that are concise but memorable. Don't overwhelm someone with too much information. You could mention their height, like are they tall, short, average, maybe describe their build. Are they slim, athletic, stocky? And of course you can talk about hair color and maybe eye color if it's something striking.
I love that. So we're creating a little snapshot with our words. Now, what about personality? How can we describe those unique traits?
Think about words like funny, quiet, energetic, caring, serious. When you're talking to other people, it's always best to stick with positive or neutral language. You probably wouldn't want to tell someone that your uncle is grumpy or that your sister is annoying. You can save those little gems for your close friends.
Exactly. We want to keep things lighthearted and avoid any accidental family feuds. So we've talked about looks, we've talked about personality. What else can we add to our English family conversation toolkit? What's the secret ingredient here?
Well, you know what they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But a good story is worth 1,000,000. So don't be afraid to share a memory or an anecdote that really captures who that person is.
Oh, I love that stories. It's like little windows into our family albums. It gives people a glimpse of those shared moments and relationships. For example, I remember this one time. My grandfather, who by the way had this incredibly infectious laugh, decided to teach me how to fish. And let's just say patience is not exactly a strong suit in my family.
Oh, I can imagine.
So picture this. I'm this tiny ball of energy. I'm sitting there on this rickety old wooden dock. I've got my fishing rod. And I'm convinced that a giant fish is going to bite at any second.
This sounds like a classic family story in the making, Mike.
Oh, it is. It is. So, as I was saying, I'm just full of anticipation.
I like your enthusiasm.
But as anyone who's ever fished knows, it's a waiting game. And my grandfather, bless his heart, he was just a picture of patience. He would sit for hours, his rod perfectly still, his eyes just glued to the water, like a Zen master in a fishing hat. And meanwhile, I am squirming, I'm fidgeting, I'm recasting my line like every 5 minutes, convinced that I was doing it all wrong. And I must have asked him like 100 times, has it bitten yet? Has he bitten yet? And finally, after what felt like forever, he chuckled and he said, "Bite fishing isn't just about catching fish. It's about enjoying the quiet. It's about being present. And it's about appreciating the moment." And you know what? He was so right. As frustrating as it was for me at the time, that day taught me a valuable lesson about patience and the simple joys of just spending time with family.
That's a really heartwarming story, Mike. It really shows how sharing personal stories can add so much depth and warmth to your descriptions. It helps the listener connect with them on a more emotional level.
It's like we're adding those little storytelling spices to our conversation.
Eggs.
Okay, so we've talked about family size, we talked about family structure, we've covered how to introduce the different members of our families, describe their appearance and personalities, and even weave in some stories. What else can we add to our family conversation toolkit?
Well, let's be real for a minute. Families can be complicated, right? There are all those unique dynamic, the shared experiences, the inside jokes, and maybe even a few quirks that we love, and a few that we love a little bit less.
You're reading my mind, Sarah. Every family has those little endearing habits that can also drive you a little bit crazy sometimes.
Absolutely. And talking about those things, even in a lighthearted way, can make your conversations more humanist and authentic.
So how do we express that in English? How do we say, my family's a little bit crazy, but I love them?
It's about finding the right words to strike a balance. You could say something like, my dad has a great sense of humor, but he has this annoying habit of, or, my sister is incredibly helpful, but she can be a bit too. And then you can fill in the blank with a specific quirk.
Okay, so it's like acknowledging the good, but then adding a dash of playful teasing.
Exactly. And if you want to be a bit more informal, you can use phrases like drives me crazy or gets on my nerves. But remember to keep it lighthearted. You don't want to offend anyone.
Of course, we don't want to spark any family drama while we're practicing our English, so I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've gone from those initial introductions to really painting a vibrant picture of our families. Sarah, from your experience, what are some of the common mistakes people make when they're talking about their family in English?
One common mistake is forgetting to clarify sibling relationships. So remember to use those specific terms like older brother or younger sister to avoid any confusion. Another mistake is using language that's too formal or complex. Remember, everyday conversations are about being natural and relatable.
That's a good reminder. It's about connecting with people, not impressing them with fancy words.
Exactly. And finally, don't be afraid to let your personality shine through. Share those funny stories, those unique observations, those little moments that make your family special. Embrace the imperfections that make families so uniquely interesting.
I love that, Sarah. It's all about embracing what makes your family yours and then sharing it with the world, even those little quirks. So today we've learned how to introduce our loved ones, how to describe their personalities, how to share stories, and even how to poke a little bit of fun at those lovable quirks. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought. As you practice talking about your family in English, remember, it's not just about the words themselves. It's about connecting with other people. It's about sharing your experiences and building relationships. Because at the end of the day, language is a bridge that brings people together. And what better way to start building those bridges than by talking about the people who matter most to us, our families.
That's beautifully said, Mike.
You know, Sarah, that fishing story, it really got me thinking. It wasn't just about learning how to fish. It was about connecting with my grandfather, understanding his perspective, and learning a life lesson in the process.
It's amazing how those simple moments with our families can have such a lasting impact on us. They shape our values, our memories, and who we become.
Absolutely. And what we've been talking about today, describing our family members, sharing anecdotes, highlighting those little quirks. These are all skills that go beyond just language. They're about building relationships, creating understanding, and forming connections with people.
That's such a key point, Mike. These are the same skills that we use in all sorts of social situations to create bonds, to express ourselves, and to share our stories with the world.
You're right. It's about communication, empathy, and finding those common threads that connect us all, regardless of our language or background.
Exactly. So as you practice talking about your family in English, remember that you're not just mastering vocabulary, you're developing those essential interpersonal skills that will help you thrive in any environment.
I love that perspective, Sarah. It's like, we're not just learning English, we're learning how to be better communicators, better storytellers, and better humans.
That's a great way to put it.
Well, folks, I think we've come to the end of our deep dive into the wonderful world of talking about family in English. I hope you've gained some valuable insights and some practical tips for talking about your families with more confidence and fluency.
It's been a pleasure joining you on this journey, Mike.
The pleasure was all mine, Sarah. And to all of you listening, remember to keep practicing, keep sharing those family stories, and most importantly, keep those family bonds strong. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Until next time, happy learning. I'm just full of anticipation, but as anyone who's ever gone fishing knows, it's a waiting game. And my grandfather, bless his heart, was just a picture of patience. He would sit there for hours with his rod perfectly still, eyes glued to the water, like some kind of Zen master in a fishing hat. And meanwhile, I am squirming and fidgeting. I'm recasting my line every 5 minutes, thinking I'm doing it all wrong. I must have asked him 100 times, has it bitten yet? Has it bitten yet? Finally, after what felt like forever, he chuckled and said, my fishing isn't just about catching fish. It's about enjoying the quiet, being present, and appreciating the moment. And you know what? He was so right. As frustrating as it was for my younger self, that day taught me such a valuable lesson about patience and the simple joys of spending time with family.
That's a really heartwarming story, Mike. It just shows how sharing a personal anecdote can add so much depth and warmth to your descriptions. It really helps the listener connect with them on an emotional level.
It's like adding those little storytelling spices to our conversation, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about family size and structure. We've covered how to introduce different family members, describe their appearance and personalities, and even weave in some stories. What else can we add to our family conversation toolkit?
Well, families are complex. There are those unique dynamics, the shared experiences, the inside jokes, and maybe even a few quirks we love, and some we love a little less.
You're reading my mind, Sarah. Every family has those little endearing habits that can sometimes drive you a little bit crazy.
Absolutely. And talking about those things, even in a lighthearted way, can add a lot of humor and authenticity to your conversations.
So how do we express that in English? How do we say, my family is a little bit crazy, but I love them?
You have to find the right words to strike a balance. You could say something like, my dad has a great sense of humor, but he has this annoying habit of. Or, my sister is incredibly helpful, but she can be a bit too. And then you fill in the blank with a specific quirk.
Okay, so it's like acknowledging the good and then adding a little bit of playful teasing.
Exactly. And if you want to be a bit more informal, you could say things like, drives me crazy, or gets on my nerves, but just remember to keep it lighthearted and try not to offend anyone.
Right, we don't want to spark any family drama while we're practicing our English. So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've gone from those initial introductions to really painting a vibrant picture of our families. Sarah, in your experience, what are some common mistakes people make when they're talking about family in English?
One common mistake is forgetting to clarify those sibling relationships, so remember to use those specific terms like older brother or younger sister to avoid any confusion. Another common mistake is using language that's too formal or complex. Remember, everyday conversations are about being natural and relatable.
Right, it's about connecting with people, not trying to impress them with big words.
Exactly. And finally, don't be afraid to let your personality shine through. Share those funny stories, those unique observations, those little moments that make your family special. Embrace the imperfections that make families so unique and interesting.
I love that, Sarah. It's all about embracing what makes your family yours and sharing that with the world, even those little quirks. So today we've learned how to introduce our loved ones, how to describe their personalities, how to share stories, and even how to poke a little fun at those lovable quirks. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought. As you practice talking about your family in English, remember it's not just about the words themselves. It's about connecting with other people, sharing your experiences, and building relationships. Because at the end of the day, language is a bridge that brings people together. And what better way to start building those bridges than by talking about the people who matter most to us, our families.
That's beautifully said, Mike.
Sarah, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Learn English Lab today. Your insights are always so valuable.
Thank you, Mike. The feeling is mutual.
And to all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into talking about family in English. Remember to keep practicing, keep sharing those family stories, and most importantly, keep those family bonds strong. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Until next time, happy learning. You know, Sarah, thinking about that story about my grandfather and that fishing trip, it really makes me realize that it wasn't just about learning to fish. You know, it was about connecting with him and understanding his perspective and learning a life lesson along the way.
Yeah, it's amazing how those simple moments with family can really have a lasting impact on us. They shape our values, our memories, who we become.
Absolutely, and it really ties into what we've been talking about today, right? Like how to describe our family members, how to share those anecdotes, how to highlight those little quirks. Those are all skills that go beyond just language.
I think you're right.
It's about building relationships. It's about creating understanding. It's about forming genuine connections with people.
Yeah, for sure. Those are like the key ingredients for strong relationships.
And they're not limited to just talking about family, right?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, think about it. We use those same skills all the time in different social situations to make friends, to build rapport, to express ourselves, to share our stories with the world.
Yeah, you're right. It's about communication. It's about empathy. It's about finding those things that we have in common, regardless of what language we speak or where we come from.
Exactly.
So as you're practicing talking about your family in English, remember that you're not just learning new words, you're actually developing these really important interpersonal skills that will help you in all areas of your life.
I love that way of looking at it.
Me too. It's like we're not just learning English, we're learning how to be better communicators, better storytellers, maybe even better human beings.
I like that.
So folks, I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the amazing world of family and how to talk about them in English. I hope you've learned some new things today, and that you feel a little bit more confident about sharing your own family stories in English.
It's been so much fun chatting with you today, Mike.
The feeling is mutual, Sarah. Thanks for joining us. And to everyone listening out there, thanks for tuning in. Remember to keep practicing, keep sharing those stories, and most importantly, keep those family bonds strong. And hey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Until next time, happy learning. CTI. Hello and welcome to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and wow, I'm so excited for this deep dive. We're going to be talking about how to describe your ideal day, in English. Not just learning the vocabulary, but really getting to the heart of what makes you happy. And to help us unpack all of this, we have the amazing Sarah, our language expert.
I'm so happy to be here, Mike. It's going to be a great episode.
So before we jump into the specifics of how to describe a whole day, what even is an ideal day, right? Is it like a checklist of activities or is it more of a feeling? What do you think?
It's a good question, and it's tempting, I think, to go straight to those activities, but an ideal day is really personal. It's unique to you or to me. It's more about how you feel. Like at the end of the day, happy, fulfilled, at peace, that kind of thing, more than the actual things that you did.
Oh, okay. So it's not necessarily about forcing myself to go for a run, but more about the energy and the sense of accomplishment I feel after I finish the run.
Exactly. Someone else might feel that way after they curl up with a good book. It's all about what brings you joy, listener. So take a moment before we go any further and just think about that. What does ideal actually mean for you personally?
Yeah. It's so easy to get caught up in what we think we should want, not what actually makes us happy.
That's so true. But that's where the magic happens, when we actually focus on what makes us happy.
Okay, so our listeners have thought about that a little bit. Now, how do they go about describing a whole day in English? It seems like a lot to put into words.
Yeah, it can be a little bit overwhelming. But having a structure can really help. So think about it like the flow of the day. You start with the morning, then you move to the main activities that you would do. Maybe consider meals and breaks, and then how you would wind down at the end of the day in the evening.
Okay, I like that. It's kind of like building a story scene by scene.
Yeah.
So let's walk through that a little bit. So starting with the morning, how would your perfect morning unfold? What time were we waking up? And what's the first amazing thing you do when you wake up?
Okay, well, for me, I would wake up naturally. No alarm clock. Maybe 7 or 8 o'clock when the sun is just starting to peek in through the windows. And I would throw open those windows and let in the fresh air, and the birds are singing.
Oh, that already sounds so peaceful. I can feel a gentle breeze.
And listener, there's no right or wrong answer here. Maybe you're up before the sun, hitting the gym, or going for a run. Or maybe it's a slower start, like a slow breakfast, reading the news, and sipping some coffee as you ease into the day.
Yeah. It's those personal touches that make it special. Instead of just coffee, it's like you're savoring the perfect cappuccino with almond milk or whatever your favorite is.
Exactly. Those details make your description come alive and help people really understand what makes this day so special for you.
Okay, so we've got the morning routine down. Now what? What are those key activities that would make this day truly stand out?
Okay, now's the time to let your imagination go wild. Spending time with your loved ones, diving into a hobby that you're passionate about, or maybe going on some kind of adventure that gets your adrenaline pumping.
Yeah, for all of our listeners who love the outdoors, maybe it's hiking to a stunning view or kayaking on a peaceful lake.
Exactly. And for those who are more creative, maybe it's painting a masterpiece or writing a story or composing some music. The possibilities are endless.
And it's not just the activity itself, right? It's about how you describe it.
Yeah.
So instead of saying I would go kayaking, it's it'd glide across the mirror-like surface of a lake, surrounded by the beauty of nature.
Yes, Mike. That descriptive language really paints a picture and brings that day to life for whoever's listening.
And I think it's important to say that an ideal day doesn't have to be packed with activities.
Right.
Part of it could just be being relaxing and soaking in the present moment.
Oh, absolutely. Rest and relaxation are just as important as any other activity. It's about finding a good balance.
Now, I don't know about you, Sarah, but no ideal day for me is complete without some amazing food. So where does food fit into all of this?
Ugh, the culinary delights. This is another chance to really tap into those sensory details. Are we talking about a home-cooked meal? Or going to a cute little restaurant? Or packing a picnic basket and enjoying your meal in nature?
Ooh, a picnic sounds nice. I can picture it. A checkered blanket under a shady tree, sun on my face, the smell of fresh bread and fruit in the air.
I love it. You see how those details make it come alive? It's about that full experience, not just eating.
All right, so we've had an amazing morning, we've done our activities,
Yeah.
and we've had some great food. Now it's time to wind down. How does your ideal day come to a close? What's that perfect evening routine?
Well, for me, it would be something calming and restorative, like reading a good book by the fireplace, maybe taking a bath, or just spending time with family sharing stories and laughter.
That sounds so nice. For others, it might be a little bit more entertaining, like watching a movie under the stars or going to a concert.
Yeah, anything that brings you joy as you get ready to go to sleep.
Speaking of sleep, I am feeling relaxed. Just talk about all of this. But before we drift off to dreamland, we have to talk about something.
Oh, really? What's that?
Well, it's the power of language. We've been hinting at it throughout this conversation, but how important is it to use really descriptive language when you're describing your day?
Oh, it's so important, Mike. Descriptive language is what makes your ideal day come alive for other people. It's what turns a simple sentence like, I went to the beach, into a more captivating experience. Like, I spent a relaxing day at the beach listening to the soothing sound of the waves crashing on the shore.
Wow, you just transported us there. I can feel the sand between my toes and smell the salty air.
Exactly. Vivid adjectives, evocative verbs, sensory details, they all come together to create that immersive experience.
So how can our listeners start building their descriptive vocabulary? Any tips for making those words stick?
One really good way is to just be more mindful of the language you encounter every day. Like, pay attention to how authors or speakers or even your friends use words to create those images and feelings.
So it's like turning your everyday life into a little language lesson.
Precisely. You could also keep a vocabulary journal. Write down new words and phrases and their definitions, and maybe try using them in some sentences.
That's a good tip. And I bet that making flashcards or using those words in conversation with a friend or language partner can really help solidify them.
Absolutely. The more you actively engage with new vocabulary, the more natural it's going to become.
Okay, so we've given our listeners some strategies for improving their language skills.
Yeah.
Now, I'm kind of craving a concrete example. Can we look at a sample ideal day description and see how all these elements come together?
I would love to. Let's take a look.
Okay, so this example starts with the morning. And wow, they really set the scene. They talk about waking up feeling refreshed and full of energy, and that already tells us so much about the day's tone.
It does. And they go on to talk about opening their windows, letting in the fresh air and sunlight, and then they describe having a light breakfast, like toast with jam and fruit. All of these details create such a sense of peace and tranquility.
And the imagery continues as they describe going for a walk in the park. They talk about how the weather is perfect, how the trees are green, the flowers are blooming. They even bring their camera to capture the beautiful scenery.
And later they describe their afternoon at the beach. I love how they include that sensory detail of the soothing sound of the waves. It's like we can hear it ourselves.
It's so evocative. And they blend activities with feelings really well. They mention spending time with their best friend at a cozy cafe, laughing for hours, sharing stories. It's not just about the place, but about the emotional connection.
It shows how shared experiences contribute to their happiness.
And as the day goes on, they also include creative activities, like painting or writing. They talk about how these activities let them express themselves and their creativity. It's just a really well-rounded picture of a perfect day.
It really is. They've done such a good job of bringing together activities, feelings, and sensory details.
And I love how they end the day with a peaceful evening routine, spending time with family, reflecting on the day, and practicing gratitude. It's a beautiful way to end the day.
It really is. This example just shows us how to describe an ideal day using vivid language and thoughtful details.
But remember, listeners, this is just one example. Your ideal day will be unique to you. It'll reflect your passions, your values, and your dreams. Don't be afraid to let your personality shine through.
There's no one right way to envision your perfect day. The most important thing is that it resonates with you.
Okay, so we've seen a fantastic example. But before we unleash our listeners to create their own descriptions, I want to give them one more little boost. A vocabulary power-up.
Ooh, I like that idea. A vocabulary boost can help our listeners express their day with even more detail.
Exactly. And we have a handy list of words and phrases that we can share, conveniently organized by time of day or type of activity.
Fantastic. A thematically organized list makes it so much easier to learn and apply new vocabulary.
So for our early birds who are all about that morning routine, we have words like sunrise, fresh, peaceful, energizing, breakfast, tea, coffee, exercise, walk, and yoga.
And for those whose ideal day is a little bit more adventurous, we have words like relaxing, exciting, creative, adventurous, fun, enjoyable, fulfilling, and meaningful.
I'm feeling inspired already. And of course, we can't forget about food. For our foodies out there, we have words like delicious, tasty, homemade, fresh, healthy, sweet, savory, cozy restaurant, and picnic.
What a great list. And as we move into the evening, we have words like sunset, Calm, quiet family friends, movie book, music reflection, and gratitude.
Those words just evoke such a sense of peace. And finally, to capture that overall feeling of the day, we have words like happy, relaxed, joyful, content, peaceful, excited, fulfilled, and grateful.
What a wonderful collection of words.
It's like a treasure trove of language.
Yeah.
And remember, listeners, this is just a starting point. Don't be afraid to use a dictionary or a thesaurus, or look online for more words and phrases that resonate with you.
The more you explore, the more you'll discover the richness and the nuances of the English language.
So we've covered a lot today. From defining what an ideal day means, to exploring descriptive language and giving you a vocabulary boost. But there's one question we haven't answered yet.
What's that, Mike?
How can our listeners actually practice describing their ideal day in English? It's one thing to have all these great words and ideas in your head, but how do we put them into practice?
You're so right. Practice is essential for learning any language. It helps us learn new vocabulary, become more fluent, and build our confidence.
So let's brainstorm some fun ways to practice. What are your top tips?
Well, one of the simplest and most effective ways is to just write it down. Take some time to craft a detailed description using all of the language that we've talked about.
So it's like creating your own little blueprint for happiness. And don't worry about making it perfect. Just focus on getting your ideas down.
And once you've written it down, you can practice speaking it out loud. This will help you refine your pronunciation and get more comfortable using those new words and phrases.
If you're feeling brave, you can even record yourself speaking and listen back to it.
That's a good idea. Listening back to yourself can be really helpful for noticing any patterns in your pronunciation or any areas where you might be stumbling over certain words.
And why not share your ideal day description with a friend or family member or language partner? You can get feedback on your language skills, and you might even get some inspiration from hearing how others describe their ideal days.
I love that idea. It's a great way to connect with others and learn from each other.
And don't forget about visuals. If you learn best by seeing things, try drawing or finding pictures that represent your ideal day and use those as prompts to help you describe it.
Visual aids are a great way to trigger your imagination and memory.
So there you have it, listeners, a whole bunch of strategies for practicing your ideal day description and improving your English.
The most important thing is to have fun and be creative. Don't be afraid to experiment and find what works best for you.
Well, that brings us to the end of part 1 of our deep dive into describing your ideal day. We've covered a lot, but there's still so much more to explore.
We'll be back with part 2 soon.
Until then, keep dreaming big. Keep practicing and keep those language skills shining.
Welcome back to the Learn English Lab. We're diving even deeper today into how to describe your ideal day and how to really make those descriptions fantastic.
You know, Sarah, when we were talking earlier, I was thinking about something interesting about this whole idea of an ideal day. It's not just about practicing English. It's also a really great way to learn more about yourself.
I completely agree. When we think about our perfect day, we're really revealing our values, our priorities, the things that are important to us.
It's like we're looking in a mirror. And by putting those thoughts into words, we're not just improving our language skills, we're also understanding ourselves better.
Exactly. And that understanding can help us make better choices in our everyday lives.
I love that. Okay, so describing an ideal day is a fun way to practice English, and it's also a really meaningful way to learn about ourselves. But let's get back to some practical tips. Last time we talked about descriptive language. Can we go into a little more detail about that? What are some specific things our listeners can do to make their descriptions really stand out?
One really powerful technique is to use all 5 senses. Don't just describe what you would see, but also what you would hear, smell, taste, and even touch.
Oh, I like that. So instead of just saying, I would have a picnic in the park, I could say something like, I'd spread out a blanket under a shady tree and the smell of freshly cut grass would be all around. I'd bite into a juicy strawberry and savor the sweetness, and then enjoy the satisfying crunch of a fresh baguette.
Exactly. Those sensory details pull your listener right into your ideal day and make it much more vivid and memorable.
It's like we're right there with you, experiencing it. What are some other ways to make our descriptions more lively and engaging?
Using figurative language can be really effective. Think about metaphors and similes. They can make your descriptions more interesting by creating comparisons.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Instead of saying, the sun was shining brightly, you could say, the sun was a golden orb radiating warmth like a giant hug.
Wow, that's much more vivid. What about similes? How can those help?
Similes are great too. For example, instead of the clouds were fluffy, you could say the clouds were like cotton candy drifting across the azure sky.
I love that imagery. It adds a touch of whimsy and makes the description more memorable.
And don't forget about using strong verbs and adjectives. Instead of using weak or general words, choose ones that are more specific and interesting. Like instead of walk, you could use stroll, saunter, or hike, depending on where you're walking and how fast you're going.
And instead of just saying happy, you could use ecstatic, joyful, or blissful to really capture how you're feeling.
Exactly. Choosing your words carefully can really add depth to your descriptions and make them more captivating for your listeners.
So it's not just about what we describe. It's about how we describe it. We need to find the words that really capture the essence of our ideal day and make it come alive for others.
Think of it like you're painting a picture with words. The more vibrant and detailed your brushstrokes are, the more beautiful the final painting will be.
I love that analogy. We've been talking a lot about using descriptive language,
Yeah.
but I think it's worth mentioning that sometimes less is more.
Oh, that's a really important point. It's tempting to add in every detail, but sometimes a simple, well-crafted sentence can be just as effective as a long paragraph full of descriptions.
It's about finding that balance between giving enough information to engage your listener, but not so much that you overwhelm them.
Exactly. And finding that balance will depend on your personal style and the overall tone you want to create in your description.
So we need to trust our instincts as storytellers and let the words flow naturally.
Absolutely. And just like any skill, practice makes perfect. The more you experiment with different descriptive techniques, the more confident you'll become in expressing yourself.
Speaking of practice, I have a fun challenge for our listeners.
I love a challenge. Tell me more.
Imagine that you're describing your ideal day to someone who doesn't speak English. How would you get your message across using only gestures, facial expressions, and maybe a few basic English words?
What a great challenge. That would really force our listeners to think outside the box and communicate in new ways.
Yeah, it would make them rely more on nonverbal cues, which is a really important part of communication.
I love that idea. It's like a form of storytelling without using a full vocabulary.
And who knows, maybe you'll inspire our listeners to learn some sign language.
That would be fantastic. Communication is such an amazing thing. There's so many different ways to express ourselves and connect with others.
Okay, before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, let's go back to the idea that describing our ideal day can be a form of self-discovery.
It's a chance to really explore what's important to us and maybe even uncover some hidden desires or dreams that we haven't thought about before.
As our listeners are working on their ideal day descriptions, I want them to remember that it's more than just an English exercise. It's a chance to connect with themselves on a deeper level.
You said it perfectly, Mike.
Welcome back to the Learn English Lab for the final part of our deep dive into describing your ideal day.
We've talked about so much already, from descriptive language to that fun challenge of describing your day without speaking. Did you give it a try, listener? We'd love to hear about it.
But now it's time to put it all together and share some last tips for creating a truly amazing description of your perfect day.
I can't wait to hear what you've come up with, Mike.
Well, I think it's important to remember that describing your ideal day is more than just a list of things you would do. It's about telling a story that will draw your listener in and make them feel like they're right there with you.
That's so true. A good story can take us to different places, make us feel different emotions, and create memories that will last a lifetime.
Exactly. So how can we use those storytelling skills to make our ideal day descriptions even better?
Think of your day as a journey, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Start by setting the scene. Introduce yourself and anyone else who might be a part of your day.
Then build some excitement. Describe the activities that you do, the challenges you face, the happy moments you experience.
And to wrap it all up, talk about the overall feeling of the day and why it was so special.
It's like writing a mini novel about our perfect day. And speaking of novels, one way to get better at storytelling is to pay attention to how authors create those amazing scenes in their books.
Reading is such a great way to learn new techniques and get inspiration for our own writing.
Notice how they use dialogue, sensory details, figurative language. All of those things can help create a really immersive experience for the reader.
And don't be afraid to try out those techniques yourself.
So we've talked about storytelling, we've talked about descriptive language, but there's one more important piece of the puzzle: grammar.
Oh yes, grammar. The foundation of good writing. It's easy to get carried away with our creativity, but using correct grammar is essential for clear communication.
What are some of the most common grammar mistakes that our listeners should watch out for when they're describing their ideal day?
One common mistake is using the wrong verb tense. Since we're talking about a hypothetical situation, we need to use the conditional tense, which means using would plus the base form of the verb.
So instead of saying, I go to the beach,
Yeah.
we would say, I would go to the beach.
Exactly. And it's also important to make sure your subjects and verbs agree. For example, if you're talking about yourself and a friend, you would say, we would go to the beach. Not, we would goes to the beach.
Right. And don't forget about those articles. On a Carrick. They might seem small, but they make a big difference in how clear your sentences sound.
And prepositions, too, and twillim, they can be tricky, but they're really important for talking about time and location.
Those are all great reminders, Sarah. And listeners, if you're not sure about a grammar rule, there are so many helpful resources available online and in libraries.
Don't be afraid to ask for help or do some extra research. The more effort you put into improving your grammar, the better your writing will be.
Okay, so we've come to the end of our deep dive into describing your ideal day. I hope you've learned a lot about descriptive language storytelling and grammar.
And most importantly, I hope we've inspired you to think about what truly makes you happy and to use your imagination to create a beautiful description of your perfect day.
There's no right or wrong answer. It's all about what brings you joy and peace.
So let your creativity flow and create something that truly represents your ideal day.
And don't forget to share your descriptions with us in the comments. We'd love to hear about your dream day adventures.
And before we say goodbye, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel for more fun language lessons.
Until next time, keep dreaming, keep practicing, and keep those language skills shining. We'll see you soon for another deep dive. Bye for now.